we're kicking off this week's podcast with a special guest who's joining us to break down this movie today. We have Daniel Perez, who is one half of the Unqualified Heroes podcast, who's joining us today to talk about Blue Beetle. Danny, how you doing today, man?
Oh yeah, I'm doing great. The crowd goes wild. Woo! It's just a blast to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, love that energy, love the excitement. As you know, we joined you a couple of months ago, which is kind of crazy to think we're already at the end of the summer. We first talked about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. That was a really fun podcast. Of course, I think it was a movie that we all really enjoyed. So it was a great time talking about that. So we definitely wanted to repay the favor, have you come on today to talk about Blue Beetle. Before we dive in and talk about the film, though, can you just kind of let the people know, in case they don't, what you do over at Unqualified Heroes, some of the things you all talk about, where they can find you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so as he alluded to before, I am one half of Unqualified Heroes. You can find us at Unqualified Heroes on Twitter, Instagram, well, I guess X now, but Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And yeah, we just talk about Marvel, Star Wars, superhero, pop culture. I mean, we talk about it all, kind of like you guys, and we're just big nerds like you guys.
Amazing. Love to hear that. Love to see that. And you guys are talking about Ahsoka right now as well, the new series on Disney Plus. And
Oh
so
yeah.
would definitely encourage people, if you are watching that new Star Wars series, to go check out their coverage and all their other previous episodes. But let's go ahead and dive in today and get into Blue Beetle, which is the reason why we are here. So this is a really interesting film in the DC landscape. This is the third of four feature films that DC is dropping this year. We already got Shazam: Fury of the Gods back in March. We just recently got The Flash at the top of the summer. Now comes Blue Beetle before we finally get Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, presumably in December. We'll see if that actually holds or not due to the Hollywood strikes, but we'll have to see. But DC is in a very interesting space right now. We of course all know about the transition that is upon us with James Gunn and Peter Safran taking over the universe, and of course rebooting pretty much everything that we know about the DC characters and kind of starting their own story. But Blue Beetle as a movie is in a weird sort of in between space, because James Gunn has said many things about this movie as to whether or not it's going to be connected to his future DCU plans. He says that Blue Beetle is the first DCU character, but it's not technically a DCU film. Not really sure what that means at this point. But this movie was actually greenlit a few years ago under the Walter Hamada administration. And I remember at that time, Walter Hamada, when he was running DC, he talked about creating other films that perceivably were a little bit more risky, was I think the terminology that he used for smaller, lesser known characters. And he sort of equated that to characters like Blue Beetle, Batgirl, which we know ultimately got canceled, which is, still unfortunate to think about. And this movie was also initially slated for HBO Max, well, now called Max. Instead, they decided to go ahead and give it a theatrical release, put a little bit more money behind it, give it I think a proper rollout. So Des, let's actually start with you. Why do you think that Blue Beetle was a character that they wanted to explore? I think just considering that it did start off as a streaming only property before they ultimately decided to give it a full theatrical release.
I think similar in some ways to the MCU, where the MCU had kind of, I think, run the gambit of a lot of the popular, not only popular, but white characters that had been going on at the time, right? I mean, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, we had all seen enough of them. And I think DC was starting to run into the same thing. We had seen the Batmans, we had seen the Wonder Womans, we had seen the Supermans. And now it's time to start bringing out the characters, at least that's close enough that people might know who they are. And I say that because Blue Beetle has been part of so many other things, I think, in recent pop culture, and so many animated DC movies. I'm pretty sure he was in like Teen Titans Judas Contract, pretty sure he was in like Apocalypse War, so many other of those. And I remember even Blue Beetle was also in Injustice 2. I remember as an unplayable character. So I think people who enjoy DC outside of the realm of film as well, at least might have heard something about Jaime Reyes as Blue Beetle. Even talking about, as much as I love Young Justice, but he also exists in that realm as well. So I think it was just once you start looking out of the realm of your normal characters, it's like, okay, who's up next? And I think Jaime Reyes as Blue Beetle was just one of those ones that made sense for DC at the time.
It felt like that they also, I think, to add on to that point, they kind of realized that they had to really diversify the portfolio of characters that they were gonna create films and stories around. I think a lot of the criticism that people had been sort of sort of leveraging against DC was the fact that they just constantly leaned on the Trinity, Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, and we had just got we got into a point where it's like, okay, we've seen enough of them. What other characters do you have? But I think also simultaneously we've reached a really interesting point where they have now reached that place where they are giving, more characters, more films, and more opportunities to sort of come to the forefront. But it doesn't necessarily seem like the audience is there for that. But we'll get to that in a second. Danny, what I want to ask you is, what if any, was your relationship to the Blue Beetle character before this film came out? Did you have any sort of extensive knowledge about the character? Had you seen any of those animated films or played him as a character in any game? What was your, sort of level of familiarity with the character of Blue Beetle?
Yeah, so I wasn't like the most familiar with Blue Beetle, as I have some other friends who like that's actually their favorite DC character. However, I played Injustice 2, so he was a playable character there, like Des had said. I played him there, and in Young Justice, I was a big fan of Young Justice and the original Justice League show. He wasn't in that one. He was in Young Justice, and for those who watch Smallville, big throwback. I love Smallville, but he was technically in there, even though that's a different version of Blue Beetle. But he was technically in Smallville, so that I did have like a vague knowledge of Blue Beetle, but it wasn't to the degree of like him having his own spotlight like he did here.
Yeah, very, very similar for me. Knew of the character. I think really in the past 10 years, DC as a company has done a really great job at providing more exposure to the Blue Beetle character. Where I first really remember him sort of coming to the forefront of my mind was the Justice League Unlimited series, where they focused on a lot of those supporting players within the Justice League. I mean, there were like 100 heroes in that show that they would just constantly like shift episodes and focal points towards. And I remember him being a part of that show. And then, of course, like all the things you all mentioned, Young Justice, the Injustice 2 video game, that kind of really made me become more keenly aware of Blue Beetle, and just also the fact that there are numerous interpretations of Blue Beetle. It's not just one person. There are 3 or 4 different iterations of that character, and Jaime Reyes is actually the third iteration of that character, which this movie focuses on. So I thought it was an interesting choice to kind of, lean into one of the lesser known properties, but I did like the idea that DC was starting to really just kind of go deeper into the bag and say like, well, what else is here? What other type of stories can we tell that we're not really giving ourselves, the opportunity, or that we have given ourselves the opportunity to tell in the past? I do wonder if maybe it was too little too late, perhaps, hindsight being 2020, but that is another conversation we'll explore here in a second. I want to talk about the box office of this movie because, as I mentioned at the top, this is the third of 4 feature films coming out from DC this year, and it's been a really, really, really rough stretch for DC lately when it comes to the theatrical box office. And right now with Blue Beetle, its first domestic opening weekend brought in $25 million, which represents the second lowest DC opening thus far. It's only ahead of Wonder Woman 84, which opened to 16.7 million, but we can't forget that movie opened in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, so it already has an asterisk next to it. When you look at some of the other films that have recently come out, The Flash opened to $55 million, which again sort of underperformed against industry expectations. Same with Shazam! Fury of the Gods, had a $30 million opening, and Black Adam last year with $67 million on its opening weekend, which did represent the highest of Dwayne Johnson's career, but that movie kind of tapered off after the second and third weekend. So there's been a really, really rough patch with these movies. And I think on an even larger scale with superhero movies entirely, we've been kind of having this conversation. I know we've talked about it on Two Black Nerds. I'm sure you all have talked about it on Unqualified Heroes. And I recently read an article from the Hollywood Reporter by Richard Newby where it was titled, "Where Have All the DC Fans Gone?" Because this is not a new trend where a movie comes out and underperforms. He posited that maybe it's because DC has always had a particular strength with filmmakers and letting their visions really kind of drive the strategy and the marketing of their movies. And that's how they really build fandoms. When you go back to Richard Donner with Superman, Tim Burton with Batman, Zack Snyder, Chris Nolan, they have a long history of filmmaker driven projects, whereas the pieces of connectivity haven't necessarily worked as well for them, like the MCU is just extraordinarily done for so long. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I don't know how many people are necessarily paying to the filmmakers behind some of these projects, but I'm sure that is at least somewhat of a factor. But Danny, I kind of want to ask you, what are your thoughts just about the fact that this movie once again sort of underperformed against industry expectations, but it's just the latest in a long line of films that have come out that nobody really takes the time out to go see?
Oh my gosh, there's so many different like elements to this big picture. As far as Blue Beetle specifically, honestly, I think it's quite sad because I think this movie was pretty good, and even had, in some sense, a groundbreaking uh, element to it, being like a Latino led movie. And
Mhm.
that's not something that we've really gotten, with diversity, and a lot of characters are white. So and in that part, I think is pretty sad. But with so many things going on, one, I think um, people are just waiting for James Gunn's DC, and they're like, I don't even care. Why even watch these DC movies? I might as well just wait for James Gunn's DC. Two, there's like the whole strike thing going on, so there's less promotion for it, and all these like, oh, maybe do I support the actors, and do I do this? It's like some people don't even know what to do. Then there's the whole question of superhero fatigue. Is there superhero fatigue? That's another thing. Um, and then it's like, I just think with DC, they've had this trend of like not good movies, that now that there's like this character of Blue Beetle who most people don't know of as well as Superman and Wonder Woman, Batman, that it's like, oh well, if this character that I love, like the Flash, is so bad, how could a character that's like not even all that, even like, how could that movie be so great? Like, I'm not, word of mouth is a big thing, and word of
Mhm.
mouth for this movie, it wasn't really there. So there's just so many, I mean, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg. There's so many different elements that goes into these superhero films, that's like, because we originally, the question was like, is just movies, are movies dying? And to me, that I was genuinely thinking that. I was like, maybe it's not just superheroes. Like, I don't really remember like this big box office movie lately. But then we got Avatar 2. Then Barbie came out as like making a crap ton of money. Oppenheimer technically didn't make as much money as Barbie, but like there was a lot of word of mouth for it. A lot of people went to go see it. So it's like, okay, it's really, it's not the death of movies, because maybe it was the streaming service, but then it's like these big movies came out, and it's like, okay, it's not that. It's like there's other factors that people have to look into, the industry has to look into it, and real understand like what's actually going on as to why people are not going out to see these DC Marvel films as they used to in the past.
Yeah, I think by and large, for sure, that movies in general don't play as important of a role as they used to in pop culture,
Mhm.
just because there are so many other things that people can invest their time into when you have TikTok and video games and Instagram, and there's just so many other options out there. I don't think movies are as important, but we do see exceptions when studios craft experiences that people feel like they have to be a part of, like the Barbenheimer phenomenon, which is, still steamrolling over all the competition. Des, from a DC standpoint specifically, this is the latest entry in a long line of films that have underperformed. I think we
Yeah.
talked about this with the Flash, that this is not new information. I know we
Mhm.
constantly revisit this conversation, and the headlines always come out like lowest DC opening ever, but fans have kind of abandoned DC years ago. I think
They
really
jump
with the
ship.
with the exception of these really, strong filmmaker led projects like the Batman from Matt Reeves or
Mhm.
Joker from Todd Field, unless we're talking about these platinum characters that are always going to sort of persevere and permeate pop culture, when they try to explore some of these lesser known characters that haven't necessarily had the opportunity to be at the forefront, it just hasn't worked. So, what do you ultimately, sort of attribute to that? Do you think it's just the nature of where DC is? Are people waiting for James Gunn and what they have in store? Or
Mhm.
are people just overall kind of just over, what superhero movies have to offer in this day and age?
Man, it still really is any and everything. It's all the above. Everything we're all saying is true. I have to also think that we expected, well, we didn't, I don't say, I can't say I expected, but when you first hear that a Blue Beetle movie is coming out, as somebody who's supposed to be Mexican American, you would hope that this would feel to other Mexican Americans as Black Panther filled to other African Americans, right? But there's a difference in the energy. Energy is so important, especially when it comes with these superhero movies. And I think when you look at the energy surrounding Blue Beetle and everything leading up to it, everything we're talking about, every weird DCEU ending, starting thing happening, / Black Adam isn't that good, / these last couple DC movies just haven't been that good. The energy has not been there. They haven't done the groundwork with their more known characters to say, man, we might have something with this lesser known character over here. They simply haven't done it. As again, I'm kind of making this comparison. It is a very broad generalization, but when Black Panther comes out, phase 3 of the MCU is cracking. You telling me Homecoming is out, Ragnarok is out? It's just a lot going on at that time. And then you telling me that you're going to put that in the middle, Black Panther in the middle of all of that? Absolutely. I just have a feeling if Blue Beetle had been backed by some of that same energy, we'd be having a different conversation. But DC has not stepped up to the plate right now, as we can see. It has not really been in their favor. And what it's interesting because I say all these things are right, and there is a very interesting point that a lot of the good DC films are tied to like these big filmmakers, right? You could argue Zack Snyder should have been one of those people, and it didn't work out. But you could be like, it didn't necessarily work out, but could also argue why is it every project that's not a part of your main core story of the DCEU is backed by those big filmmakers? You know what I'm saying? Why isn't Matt Reeves making a Batman movie within the DCU? Why isn't Todd Phillips' Joker being in the DCU? Why isn't a high caliber Christopher Nolan-esque type person helping shepherd your movies within the DCU and making it what it is? A Tim Burton, why isn't that a thing? If you see all those movies succeeding on the outside, why don't you bring that idea inside? It doesn't really make any sense at the end of all of it. You know what I'm saying? And so I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of things. Again, everything we've said is just it's weird, man. And they got some working out to do. But man, a lot of it is that energy that DC is putting out right now, and it hasn't been there. If you tell me one movie is bad, and 2 movie is bad, why should I get up to have to go see the 3rd movie? If you there's no trust anymore. And so of course people didn't show up to see the film. This is how it is.
Yeah, I would love to get like some focus groups about what exactly is happening here. That's to that point you just made about the filmmaker driven projects. I think it's interesting that it feels like that's what they were first going after when Zack Snyder was kind of like coming in at the beginning, early stages, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman. But because of all these regime changes at the company itself, I don't think that there's ever been one true vision until really now, where we're getting with James Gunn and Peter Safran, because even Walter Hamada, again, this movie was greenlit under his administration. At that particular time, we've talked about it numerous times across the podcast, where it just kind of felt like the DC was trying to be all things to all people. They had 7 different connective universes. They had 3 Jokers and 6 Batman, and you just didn't necessarily know like what the end goal was, if there was any to begin with. And it kind of just felt like they were just throwing anything to see where it could stick towards the wall. And I think in addition to that, that kind of led to a bit of a smaller focus on filmmaker driven projects from that standpoint. And Danny, earlier you talked about the strike. I mean, it's really, really unfortunate for Zolo Maraduena, as the star coming in here to have like this first big breakout role. Of course, he's on Cobra Kai, which he's really good on, but this is like his first huge feature film in America, and him not having that opportunity to properly promote the movie along with the rest of the cast as well. That is a crutch that will ultimately hinder, I think, the performance of any movie when your stars can't actively be out to promote it. And that's not their fault. That is on the part of the studios. Like, the studios should be doing everything in their power to allow the filmmakers and the actors and all of the people who are part of the crew to be able to promote these things. But we're seeing the effects of that as well, along with all the other stuff that's been mentioned. But I want to pull back even more on this conversation. We've talked about DC, superhero movies in general, because Marvel is struggling as well. We are not going to leave them out of this conversation. They are not clean in this in this at all. There have been exceptions. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, very successful movie. Even Across the Spider-Verse, hugely successful, overperformed on that front from Sony and Marvel. But they have had some missteps as well with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Critically, they've also had some missteps. They have seen the box office somewhat decrease over the course of some of their recent films. And so we talk about this idea of superhero fatigue, and I don't know if I buy into that in general. Again, I think that there's a bigger conversation with movie going as a whole, but are we just at the point where superhero movies as a genre, quote unquote, are not at the forefront of the box office as much as they used to be, because
Mhm.
for about 15 years there they were untouchable. You could pretty much put out anything and branded Marvel or DC, and it was like guaranteed to make a lot of money for you, like 5, 6, 700 million dollars a bill. Like at one time Marvel was just putting out film after film, easy $1 billion. That's not the case anymore. And I think that we're still going to see successful movies. I still think many of them will probably make good money. But are we just at the point where they're not at the forefront of the conversation? And if we have reached that point, is there something else? Is there another genre? Is there another trend that could perhaps come in and fill that void? Danny, what do you sort of think about that, and just like the sort of place that superhero films occupy, at least in terms of the box office?
That's a good question. I think there's multiple layers to this onion we're peeling back. The first thing is, we live in a very impatient world, and if we think about phase one, I don't think phase one really made all that much money, and probably even phase two of Marvel, it was like the hype was still there, but like it really started making money come phase three and like the end of phase two, when we had Avengers 2, is like that's when it really started making a bunch of money. So I think one is just people, it's hard to go back down to ground zero and kind of like reset. And phase four is like this reset of like a new saga. And so people are like resetting. It's hard to do that because now, and then you got the addition of the Disney Plus shows. It's like, okay, now I got to watch this, to watch that, to watch this. And it's like, I got to do all this. And it's hard for the casual viewer to go enjoy a certain film when they have to watch so many predecessing movies. And is along with the CGI issues. I mean, Marvel has had serious CGI issues. I mean, the whole point of some, not the whole point, but some of the point of this strike is, oh, the overwork, the like not enough, too many hours, not enough time to get things done. I mean, you've heard stories about people who are like, I'm literally working on this film until 2 hours before it releases. Like it's just like, bro, you can't be doing that. This is not good for like mental health or anything. Like what? Like you talk about like last minute, that's last minute. And so I think that's one issue. And then you got the other issue where it's just like back then, well, I say back then, it's not too long, but like last decade, superhero films were kind of like this generational thing that we grew up with, and nothing that really was there before the last decade. I mean, Iron Man came 2008, so very late in the early 2000s, and then going into the 2010s. So it's like we didn't really have a ton, like not like a universe of superhero films until then. And then now we have, geez, how many? Probably like 50 projects with Marvel and DC combined. That it's like some people kind of just want something new, something fresh. And I'm sure we'll talk about it when we get to the Blue Beetle topic specifically, but a lot of these films are kind of like overlapping each other in like script in a sense. So it's like I'm watching the same thing. I'm not getting something fresh to a degree that I just want something new. Barbie was fresh. Oppenheimer was fresh. It's just like I want something new, and I think a lot of people are having that sense of feeling.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. There was also just that story about one of the VFX workers who worked on WandaVision, and he quit after 8 days. And he talked about how they just expected him to work 16, 17-hour days, and he was getting paid crap money. And he was like, I'm not fucking doing this. Like, there's no way I'm going to walk away. And now we see like the Walt Disney Company, all of their in-house VFX workers are voting to unionize because of how pervasive a problem it has become. Des, what do you think about this? Just, superhero movies sort of being at the forefront of the box office. Is that era over? And if so, what would you say is kind of the era that we exist in now? Because I do think that movies will still come out and make money. Like we still have examples.
For sure.
Guardians 3, Across the Spider-Verse, very successful films, the Batman from last year. So they're not dead. That's not even close. But if they're not at the apex and at the forefront of the box office, then do they just occupy second place, third place? What's the relationship between this genre and potentially other genres that can come in and fill that void?
Man, I think we'll see over the next couple years. I think will be telling of what happens, because I really do think it's in the hands of the studios making superhero movies and what they make it. The reason that Guardians and Across the Spider-Verse is so good, it's like, oh, they're superhero movies, but there's so much shit in there we've never seen before that make them good movies. And to Daniel's point, there's so much DNA being interwoven between a lot of these other superhero films. You're like, dang, I feel like I just kind of seen that thing. And, you know, to your point, Jordan, that's what makes it more mid fatigue than anything. Oppenheimer and Barbie are what they are because we've never seen movies like them before. That's why they are what they are. And I think we're just caught up in a weird superhero genre right now where we feel like, I don't know, where I guess the studios feel like we have to include some of that DNA on the safe side. You know what I mean? Of like, oh, we can't do anything too crazy. But what's interesting is that's how comics work. We know good comic runs, and we know nothing about the comic runs in between. You know about Batman the Long Halloween. You know about all these there's so many bad comic runs in between because they're probably doing some of the same boring shit that some of these movies are doing in real time. We're just seeing it on a movie level. Comics go through this exact same thing, man. And I think it's just it really does take a reality check, but it also takes risk. It also takes figuring out what people want to see. And I think when what we are also seeing in real time is when you take risks, it most of the time. So as of right now, most of the time, it's been pretty successful, right? When people take those risks. And again, Cross Spider-Verse is nuts. That movie is crazy. There's so many things in there have never been done before. There's a lot in Guardians that James Gunn was doing that had actually never been done before. It's very stylish, you know what I mean? And so I think as moviegoers, as people who do like superhero content, I think we're looking for some of those things, some of those risks to be taken. Because now what is kind of not necessarily taking the spot, but what does feel like it's on the come up, right? Is some of those video game things, some of those proper video games and toys are kind of going crazy right now. Last of Us feels really good. Gran Turismo just came out. You know what I'm saying? There's a TV show about Twisted Metal right now. You know, there's a lot happening in the video game genre, in I guess now the toy genre with Barbie and some other upcoming projects. But it just feels like they're taking risk on those projects as well. They're not just being like, let's take some superhero DNA and ingest it with something else. They're like, no, this is new. You've never seen this before. And that's what's keeping the ball rolling in some of those other types of films. So I really think it's really on the filmmakers of these studios that determines if superhero films are going to go to the second and third spot when it comes to type of movies that will be successful at the box office. But if they stay in the same thing they're doing right now, not taking enough risks, or again, sometimes you go overboard. I think Quantumania was a big ass swing. Don't get me wrong. Quantumania was a swing for the fences. Let me tell you, it's not always going to work, but you can't be afraid when it doesn't work. You know what I mean? And I think that's what I'm afraid of. That's why in my mind I'm like, they might have to go to the second or third spot. I, in my right mind, can't see Marvel going, that was a swing. Let's go back into our old ways. Secret Invasion. I'm just kidding. No, but I really, that's just what I think is going to happen. And so I'm hoping they don't do that. I'm hoping people keep, again, trying to make tasteful content with taking risks, because I think that's what's going to take for that superhero genre to stay number one. And if not, they're going to get booted by some of these other fresher projects coming out.
DC has also historically been a victim to that, of putting out riskier projects, riskier takes on characters. Fans reject it, or it becomes polarizing, and then they become gun shy and all of a sudden revert back to previous ways, or they try to adapt to a formula that's successful elsewhere, like the MCU. And then we just see that now it just doesn't work because you're obviously leaning towards something that isn't necessarily your strong suit. But I think the superhero film genre has just fallen into the trap that every other media form has fallen into over the past 10 years. And that's oversaturation. That's really what it is. Like, you look at anything literally that we experience now, we are inundated with endless amounts of things all the time in every form of media: music, video games, TV, film, social media, whatever you want to say. There is countless amounts of information and opportunities available for you to dive into that stuff. And at a certain point, everybody's going to say, okay, I'm not choosing that, but I'll choose this. I'm going to stay away from that, but I'll go towards this. you have to make choices because there's no way that any one person can consume everything that's available. And now superhero movies are just a reflection of that. Once we got the boom with the MCU and things became really successful, Danny, to like what you said, phase 3 was really them hitting their stride and hitting a stride that we have not necessarily seen out of any other franchise in Hollywood history. And then Avengers Endgame happens and the MCU effectively is over. Like it ends. That's really the culmination of everything that we have been wanting and waiting for. And then you have to reset, which they kind of do, but then they kind of don't. They more so say, let's expand and let's grow. And they greenlight 35 TV shows and 75 more movies. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, this is a little bit more than I was asking for. Now I have to like keep up with this on a 52-week a year basis. And I think that just becomes way too much for people on top of the DC stuff, on top of the stuff that we get from Sony. There's still TV shows, there's animation, people still read comic books, video games. At a certain point, you have to make choices. And when you get a movie that isn't necessarily breaking any new ground, perhaps like a Blue Beetle, I think a lot less people are just going to choose that. And they're going to lean towards those experiences that feel groundbreaking, that feel fresh and feel new to what we've been saying this entire time, like a Spider-Verse, like the Batman, like Guardians of the Galaxy. Those things often feel fresh and different and don't necessarily resemble other things that we're getting. But when I get another origin story out there in the landscape, it's like, okay, we've been doing the same formula for about 25 years now. Do we have to do this once more? Like, do we really need another formula of a superhero origin story? I think that's where we are. They've just also reached where every other form of media, is kind of, sort of fallen into. Like, there's no way you watch everything on Netflix anymore. Like, at one point, Netflix had 2 shows. It was House of Cards and Orange is the New Black. Now Netflix has hundreds of shows, and you probably can't name 10 that's on the air right now. You know what I'm saying? So I think that that's just kind of like the nature of the business, because once something becomes super successful, they are going to milk. They're going to milk it for everything it's worth. They're going to try to mine that IP for all of its value and really kind of just inundate us with everything that they have to offer. So I think that's where we are right now. And ultimately, who knows what the future holds with James Gunn's DCU? We'll have to sit by and see. Perhaps because it is Superman, that'll be a character that perseveres and sort of restores them to former glory. But we'll have to sit by and wait. But with all of that out the way, let's dive into this movie. Let's actually go ahead and review the brand new feature film from DC, Blue Beetle. Now, this movie is directed by Angel Manuel Soto, and it's written by Gareth Dunnet Alcocer, and it's starring Jolo Meroduena, Adriana Barraza, Damian Alcazar, Raul Max Trujillo, Susan Sarandon, and George Lopez. So, as usual, what we like to do with the Marvel and DC projects when we explicitly and exclusively focus on the movie, we'll dive into spoilers and do a character-by-character breakdown and also talk about some of the other big elements and moments of the movie. But before we get into all of that stuff, in case you have not seen Blue Beetle yet, we will start off with our non-spoiler thoughts. And Danny, I'm going to pass it over to you since you are our guest today. I just want to get your, sort of big picture general thoughts. How did you feel about this brand new DC feature film, Blue Beetle?
So going into this, I had the lowest of expectations because while Blue Beetle is this great character, we've just had this trend with DC, even a trend with Marvel, where movies have just not been the greatest hit lately. So I had very low expectations. But when I walked out of the theater, I was happy. I was like, I enjoyed that movie. Was it this phenomenal movie that's going to break the universe? No, but like it was a good movie. It was enjoyable. I laughed a lot. I thought it was very funny. Does it have similar DNA to other films? Yes, but the Latin twist that they put on it and just technically a new character that we haven't seen on the big screen still felt somewhat fresh to me. So overall, I very much enjoyed the movie. Did it have its issues? It did, but it was still a good film.
Absolutely. Des, how did you feel about Blue Beetle? What were your thoughts after you left the movie theater?
Yeah, man. I have been accustomed now to liking Jaime Reyes, man, over all the things, I kind of said that where I found him or where he's been in recent years. So I was a little excited again just to see the character be portrayed on the big screen, period. One of the first Latin characters to ever get the title, you know what I'm saying, and to lead a film. So I was excited to go see it, and I'm pretty much echo what Danny said here in terms of there's a lot of DNA of other origin films we see in this movie. It's like Iron Spider and Lava Girl. I don't know what's called. No, it really does have a lot of those elements you felt before, and it's a lot of bittersweetness coming out of the film for me, man. There's times where this movie feels like it could have been on the CW, or it feels like it was on Nickelodeon, and then the next second in the movie is like, wait a second, that was a really good action scene. Where the hell did this come from? To be honest, I don't know what was happening in this. It's like you can very much tell where the budget was in this movie. I think at a lot of certain points, because it's just really it was very tonally off sometimes. It was a roller coaster of tones happening through the film. But what I will give this movie, what I do like about it, is the family aspect behind the film, that we'll talk about more in depth. It really did add I think a different dynamic to the movie. It kind of feels like what we got a little bit out of Miss Marvel, which is kind of it's so different from a lot of the other films we get. Again, and a lot of our main characters out of the MCU and DC, everybody got daddy issues, nobody has a family, everybody, you know what I'm saying? But here, Blue Beetle is about family and about the family that Jaime does have surrounding him, and how they tackle the issues of this movie together. And I think when it focuses on that, that's when this movie is really good. Where it doesn't work for me as well as the weird tonal budget thing going on, it's kind of the villain part of it. I wasn't really feeling the whole villain thing. Part of it is the script. I think there's some weird stuff with Susan Sarandon that was like, is this a soap opera? I don't know. I just didn't feel I was not in it 100% with the villains. I was like, that was a kind of a whack line. That was kind of lame. Why did you say that? That's when the movie really didn't work for me. But again, on the flip side, man, it really is about the family. It really is about Abuela. It really is about Rudy. It really is about all the problems that I think they kind of point at that Latin Americans might face in today's world. And that's when the film succeeds for me. So it's a fine film. It's not without its flaws, but I will say I did somewhat at least enjoy the film while I was in the theater, man. I was a little bit surprised.
Yeah, so I can't necessarily say that I have all that much different compared to what you both have already said about the movie. I think coming into Blue Beetle, my expectations were nowhere near high at all, and that's just also sort of an effect of the DC feature films that we've gotten over the past few years. Nothing has really made me feel any type of way unless it's the Batman, or Joker, something that's just unrelated to these other characters. And so coming into this one, I was just really looking for a decent adventure, the family aspect, of course, because they had teased that in the marketing that was going to be kind of a primary focal point of the story, and some decent action, some humor, and hopefully something that felt fresh, even in the midst of just everything that we've been getting. And I think that by the time I left the movies, I felt that it was okay. It was a pretty decent and okay movie overall. And there's some things that certainly worked and were successful for me, and a fair share of things that weren't. I'll start off with the good. Primarily what's already been said, the family dynamic is really sort of the hallmark of this film and why it works so well. There's pretty great chemistry, I think, across the board between Jaime and the rest of his family, and just like those in close proximity to him. And the fact that they become a very, very active part of the story. Whereas so many superhero films, heroes have to hide their identities. They have to keep the secret from their parents or their relatives so that they can protect them and not throw them in the midst of danger. That's not really a thing in this movie. Like, the parents and the family, they are an extension of the Blue Beetle character. And I found that to be a really cool element that you just don't always see. And I do think that there were a couple of really strong performances as well. I think Jolo Meroduena, I really, really enjoyed him in this movie. I think that he has a bright career and bright future ahead of him. As I've noticed in the past, I enjoy his work in Cobra Kai, and I know Cobra Kai has some of its own detractors. That is certainly a show that leans heavy on melodrama. It feels very much like a soap opera mixed in with karate, but I love it. I think it's a great show, and I think that he definitely kind of stands head and shoulders apart from the rest of the cast, and that just kind of carried over here. He has so much charisma, so much just natural, just kind of charm to him as like a younger actor coming in to really lead this movie and carry it on his shoulders. I thought that he did a really, really tremendous job. And of course, the supporting cast around him, George Lopez is taking some very creative swings with this character. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but I like the fact that he's just like having a lot of fun with it. He doesn't really care. I also like the sister and brother dynamic a part of this story as well. I think that there's a good balance to that story. On the other hand of it, though, I think what doesn't necessarily work as well is, one, the runtime of this movie. It goes on, I think, far longer than it needs to, especially in the third act. The third act really, really drags, and I think it really just kind of goes on and on and on, and they could have taken out a few of the story beats to really tighten up the pace. The villain issue is prevalent here. I really won't add more to that until we get to spoilers, because the dynamic between Susan Sarandon and the OMAC character, it's just strange.
Mhm.
They just feel like they're in a completely separate movie entirely. I don't really know what's going on there. And really kind of the biggest issue I think overall with this movie, it's the nature of it being just so derivative of other things we've seen for so long now. I just don't know how many more origin stories we need in these films. I just think that particular formula has run its course. I think it ran its course years ago, and I would love to get back to a place where films focused on just dropping us in the middle of relationships with characters. You know, I think back to decades and decades ago, like when we first met James Bond, we didn't know anything about him. They didn't peel back his origin story until Casino Royale. That was like the
Mhm.
21st or 22nd movie that we found
Yep.
anything out about him. Indiana Jones, you just meet Indy. You don't know anything about him. He's just on his adventure. But even recent superhero examples, the Batman movie, what Matt Reeves just did a couple of years
Mhm.
ago. Hell, even Black Panther, if you really think about it, is not an origin story. Like,
Yep.
we just meet T'Challa. He's just already sort of at the forefront of the kingdom. He's priming himself to be a leader. We do see that transition happen from him just becoming the prince to becoming king, but we don't meet him as a young boy or him growing up. Like, we just kind of get thrown into it, and I think we're just at the place where we can handle that, because even if it's a new or lesser known character, if we don't get that origin story, I don't think that that's going to hinder us from enjoying the story that they tell. I think we can just like naturally drop in at a story at a point that makes sense, catch us up to speed with where the characters are, who they are, the relationships between each other, and then just kind of go from there. I think we're kind of past that point of superhero origin stories. It's been done really, really well before, and I don't know how many more interpretations and iterations of that we can get. So that's kind of the biggest criticism towards it. But overall, I think it's a fine movie. There is shared DNA across other projects, Spider-Man, Iron Man, hell, even Ant-Man. You can see some of that stuff in here. So you're not necessarily getting a ton new, but that family dynamic really does carry it quite a bit, I think, across the finish line to make it something that's at least worth checking out, at least worth experiencing, because that does change it up just a bit. Even compared to a Miss Marvel, like when you look at that show, the family is very important to it, but they're not necessarily an active part of the action. You know, they're not going
Mhm.
on missions with Kamala Khan. This family absolutely is going on missions. So I really, really enjoyed that. But those are all of our non-spoiler thoughts. Those are all of our big picture sort of feelings about the film. Let's go ahead and dive into spoilers and talk about this movie in depth. So if you've not seen Blue Beetle, this is your spoiler warning. Go check out the movie whenever you get a chance and come back and listen to the rest of our conversation. And we're going to do sort of a character by character breakdown. And we of course have to start with the titular character himself, Jaime Reyes, aka Blue Beetle, played by Jolo Medaduena, coming in here as the third interpretation of the Blue Beetle character. Now, what's really interesting here is that they do change a couple of things about Blue Beetle. One that's really important to note is the setting. Palmera City in this movie is an original creation. That is not something necessarily based off the comics. Blue Beetle is a character, has historically been based in El Paso, Texas. This city was something entirely different. I think the director, Angel Manuel Soto, he talked about wanting to give Blue Beetle his own city, kind of like Batman has Gotham and Superman has Metropolis. Why not
Mhm.
create a new city and a new setting for the character of Blue Beetle, which I thought was a really cool choice. You know, it felt like a mix between like a futuristic Tokyo, but also Miami at the same time. But it's supposed to be set in Texas, so I'm like, this is like a weird hodgepodge, but it's interesting. It's a nice creative choice. And then of course all the other things with the character. He's coming back from college. He went to Gotham Law School. He did pre-law there, and now he's rejoining his family to find out that they are in a pretty precarious position. The city is being impacted by Cord Industries. They're being displaced from their community. They're about to be put out of their home. There's a ton of gentrification happening. So the character's getting thrown into a lot upon graduating college. So, Des, I actually start with you. What did you think about sort of the opening moments of meeting Jaime Reyes before he actually becomes the Blue Beetle character? And what did you think about just some of the choices that they made to sort of ground him in this new setting of Palmera City?
Yeah, I think I like one of the challenges that they give him. I think in a lot of these superhero films, we also don't get to see, I think, the life of a normal millennial. We get a lot of time we get the life of these old billionaires or some old dude who came across something and gets powers or something. We don't normally get just like, oh, this dude just graduated college. Oh shoot, I know what that's like. This is one of the first times I was like, wait, I know what he's going through. And he graduates, and the dude is just looking for a job. And that's like and that's something I think that's so relatable again that we don't normally get in a lot of these projects. Is like, man, somebody help this dude out. And I think immediately in a lot of ways you're rooting for him. And again, not only because of his situation, but Zolo again, Marduenia, he's just he's a charismatic guy, and I think he plays his role very well of being somebody who is again somewhat lovable. And then you meet his family, and then you know you're going through all these things of him trying to get a job, how embarrassing his family is. Again, we don't get this a lot. We've seen it in other things that aren't tied to superheroes, right? This is like that might be like a coming of age, kind of movie, or like you think to Into the Spider-Verse where Miles gets dropped off and his dad is like, tell me you love me back, kind of type. There are other embarrassing moments, but again, just not like this in this dynamic. So I really like the intro that they gave us here. I really like, again, also the idea of Palmyra City. That quote in general was like, if Batman and Superman can get it, why can't Jaime Reyes get his own city too? I absolutely love that. That's a really good idea, and I'm glad they decided to go with it too. It's also interesting when you see the city and there's like LexCorp in the city. I was like, wait a second, what's happening here? Why is LexCorp next to goddamn? What are we doing here? What is this? What's going on there? I was a little curious about that, but I think the way they set it up just made sense in a lot of ways. I will say, I think they spent a little bit too much time in the beginning as well. There's that setup took a minute for me. There was a minute I was like, dang, he's not Blue Beetle yet. What time is it? Like what's going on here? But I do I think I appreciate the way they set up Jaime Reyes as a character for sure.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect setup to this follow-up question for Danny. I'm curious to know, like, how did you feel about those opening moments of the movie? It was about 20 or so minutes where we just kind of meet his family. We learn about a situation. They're facing eviction. He also gets the job at the mansion, sort of cleaning because he can't really find anything else, and he's considering going to grad school and trying to take up multiple jobs to help out with the money. So what did you think about just like all of those story beats that they injected to his character in relationship to his family?
So similar to what Des was saying, was it's just like this relatable scenario that you can see. I mean, he came back, and many people they go off to college, and it's just like, as we've been saying, alluding to, is like this whole family dynamic, and it's like they're trying to protect him from these real world things that were happening just so he could finish his degree. And he comes back and he finds all these like crazy things are going on with his family, that are like bad things that are going on. And it's just like, it puts him in this like what's the phrase, drinking from a fire hose. It's just like so much coming at you at one time, that and he's still like, he still maintains his composure in a sense. He puts his family first, as you guys were saying, like the charisma that he has, that it makes you root for the character. It makes you like want good things for him and his family. Like you just see the love that they have for each other, that I think was very much enjoyable. Fun fact about Palmyra City, the whole movie was actually shot in Puerto Rico, which was pretty interesting. I myself am Puerto Rican, and so is my co-host. And so I did not know it was shot in Puerto Rico until like I saw the credits. I was like, oh, how about that? But yeah, so just it did take a while because we were kind of saying like this whole origin story is just taking so long. And one thing about James Gunn, I know this is like something different, but one thing James Gunn did say about his new Superman movie is that it's like not technically an origin story, and it's kind of just throwing him in the character, kind of how we want to see with Indiana Jones and James Bond and stuff like that. So while I do think it was too much time, I did enjoy that we got to know this family before being thrown into the mess, because there's kind of like some pacing issues that go on in this film, but we kind of have a groundwork for what's going forward into this film, because family takes such a center stage in it. So I think that they really wanted to have that groundwork of the family before like anything else happens.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's interesting too. I mean, you pointed out the fact of going away to college and then coming back, and all of a sudden, like everything that you thought you knew when you left is now different. I've been in that experience. I've known a lot of people to be in that experience where they're off studying, they're really focused on school and just kind of living their life away at college. And then they find out some pretty devastating news coming back that their parents or relatives kept from them for the sake of not wanting that person to be to lose focus or to all of a sudden panic and do something that might be somewhat of an irrational decision based on emotion. And so when they put that in there, I was like, oh, that's a really cool idea, that yes, he's been in Gotham like all this time. He probably only gets to visit home a couple of times a year. And even when he does visit home, they're pretending that everything is okay. Like it's fine. Nobody's unhealthy. The home is great. Like we're still taking care of it. Your bedroom looks the exact same as when you left it, when that's just not the truth of the matter. And they're doing that to shield him and protect him because he is a first generation college graduate and they know how
Yep.
important that is. And I love that they did, sort of spend some time focusing on that. They're more celebratory even in the midst of those challenges that they're facing. And I also love the touches of just like exposing us to like Palmyra City as a place within this universe, and the fact that you do get the sense that things are changing and the city is evolving and gentrification is happening. There's like the one really quick shot. Now I like that they don't really harp on it too long, but you can see like on one block across the street from their home that a Starbucks is coming, stuff like that. I
Mhm.
think the key indicators that we know, like, oh yeah, gentrification is happening in this neighborhood and potentially displacing people. It's also a really big factor here. So I thought that was like good setup for just the nature of the story and what they're trying to tell, and do a bit of a bigger, I think a bigger dive into Palmyra City and really help build that world that they're trying to establish here. Let's talk about the suit, because that is a really, really important part of it, and the scarab, in fact, because that is key mythology as it relates to the Blue Beetle character. Once that does happen, there's a whole sequence when the character Jenny, is trying to retrieve the scarab because she's on opposite sides of her aunt, and she gets it in the hands of Jaime, who's just trying to find a job. He goes to Cord after meeting Jenny, and he's just trying to look for a job, and she hands him this burger container from this fast food restaurant, and it has the scarab inside of it, and he takes it back home. His family's like, what's inside, show us, try it out, whatever it is. They're trying to really egg him on and put this, this thing on him, and he does so, and it results in the suit basically, forming into his body. It becomes symbiotic with him, and I found that sequence to actually be quite horrific. It was kind of shocking how crazy it was. Like it was bulging out of his back. There was fire because his clothes got set on fire. Like things were melting out of his eyes. It was kind of a crazy visual. Des, what did you think about that whole sequence of like him getting the suit and then just like the 5 minutes thereafter where he's flying all over the place? He doesn't know how to use it. The voice inside is talking to him. It's very much
Mhm.
reminiscent of what we've seen before. But how did you
Right.
feel about just the whole sequence of him, first becoming one essentially with the scarab?
Man, it might be my favorite part of the movie, to be honest. I was like, wait a second, what am I watching? Are we sure this is Blue Beetle still? Because it is giving horror. I mean, it was really crazy. Man, it's sticking to the ceiling, looking like I seen somebody compare it to the Thing. I was like, dang, it does look like the Thing. Or like, there was just a lot happening in the scene, but I really liked it because, of course, something like that happening to you, a scarab literally becoming part of your DNA, part of your body, you meshing with this thing, it would be horrific. What I like about it, second most, apart from the way it looks, it just looked crazy, is that his family is witnessing the entire thing. Again, this is something we almost never see, is the family witnessing the person getting their powers. You know what I mean? It's usually like some isolated thing of like, oh, you have powers. And I had to hide them from everybody for a very long time. Nope. You can see Jaime getting powers in real time. Everybody, mom, dad, abuela, the sister, everybody is seeing him get these in real time. And it's scary as hell. They didn't know what to do. They literally didn't do anything. That's what I also like about it, is in that moment, you would be too scared to do anything. And that's exactly how it was, man. All they're doing is hiding, cussing, trying to figure out what else is going on. And so it legit might be my favorite part of the movie because it was something unexpected and something we hadn't really gotten before. But that leading into the scene after that, him flying and stuff, again, we had seen it before. There was the moment right with the bus where he cuts the bus in half. I was like, nobody died for real. Like everybody is perfectly standing on these two sides of the bus that got cut in half. Nobody got cut in half in that moment. Okay, what's going on there? But even that moment, because it's a bus, you can't help it. It felt like Shang-Chi, right? Like you're watching it like, dang, this feels like Shang-Chi. I don't know how to feel about this. And everything leading up to it, it does have a little bit of Spider-Man Homecoming. It does have a little bit of Iron Man in it. I just couldn't help but feel it. There's nothing you can do. We had seen it before, but it also makes sense though for what the character is. Like it's not like it was super far fetched. Because Kaji Da is like, again, just this whole person and entity, which we see is kind of has the I guess the form of a woman, to some degree, but she definitely was I think becoming an important part of the story in that moment. Part of me just wishes they showed it another way first somehow, rather than the whole flying montage. I don't know what's happening kind of type thing. I wish there was another way they could have went about it, but I think it makes sense. It's just, again, unfortunate that we had seen it before.
Yeah, I think the scene in the house works really, really well. Once we get out of the house and we're just
Exactly.
getting to the more traditional, oh, he's flying, he's in space, he's in the city, and he doesn't really know what to do, and he's panicking, and people are just kind of witnessing this whole thing unfold, and everybody turns the other cheek. There is that one like sequence where like the guys they clearly had just took an edible or something. They're like, did it hit you yet? Like, did it hit yet? And then all of a sudden they see Blue Beetle fall on top of a car and destroy it, and they're like, yeah, I think it hit. That was a nice touch to try to make it feel a little bit different. But Danny, how did you feel about just the look of the suit as well? I think we're in this era where sometimes it's a little difficult to tell what's practical and what's like CG. This felt like that there was kind of a mix of both. I don't really know. I didn't do the research to figure out if this is like a fully CG suit, but there were many points in the movie where I was like, oh, this could be practical. This could actually like be on the physical person of Jolo, and they're actually trying to bring this to life in a different way versus like other points that are more CG heavy. How did you feel about this, the look of the suit, sort of its faithfulness to the comics, and also just like the functionality of it as well, the fact that he can just think of anything and all of a sudden conjure it up, create a sword or create anything else that comes as an extension of the suit.
Yeah, so as far as I know, it was a practical suit, and I very much enjoyed that because just I think studios are relying too much on CG, and it's like you realize you can still do these, especially with the budgets like some of these movies are coming out with. I'm like, you can do practical effects, but you're choosing to do CG. I don't know why, but this suit was practical effects, and I very much enjoyed it because I think you could very much tell the difference between this suit and suits that we've seen in other projects between Marvel and DC that are CG. It's like, well, you can definitely tell the difference because one is actually real. But as far as the scene itself, when he was getting the suit, I agree with Des. This was one of my top favorite scenes, and it I laughed a crap ton. I don't think I told all my friends that was the scene I laughed more than any other scene in that movie because I mean I just remember George Lopez being like, it's in his ass, and I couldn't stop laughing. I mean, it was just so funny because like I just think of a family, like a family dynamic, just like doing all sorts of things. One person's screaming, the other person's about to pass out, the other person's like cussing, is like, it's in his ass, like it's like all sorts all over the place. But kind of what Des was saying, like it was more graphic than I thought, and I was like, this is actually kind of terrifying. Like it to be Sholo in that moment, like I would like his eyes turned black. It was so creepy. But overall, I just very much enjoy how Angel did decide to go with the practical suit because not many directors are doing that lately.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. I think practical still. I mean, it just looks so much better, and that I think you can tell the difference too. And I think that's pretty explicit in this movie, and one of the great choices that they made. But man, yeah, that scene in the house, it was so much happening. There was one point where he electrocuted, I think, George Lopez at one point, and he was like, he's possessed. Like all of this stuff is happening. Nana is over, in the corner stitching. She doesn't know what's going on. So it was a really well executed scene. I think that this is like they knew that they had something special on their hand. That's why a lot of this was in the trailer. Because this is kind of like really the thing that captures you. It's like, wow, this young kid is very much like going through a very aggressive transformation right now. Like this scarab is probably on the brink of killing him before it actually syncs with his body and starts to become more symbiotic. And so I thought that was a really nice touch. And then we saw what happened thereafter. But let's talk about the family more in depth. There's 5 key members of this family. I want to start with the parents. Actually, his mother and father. Obviously, they are very pivotal. But it's really the father, who has a lot of the story time and a lot of the story beats in this movie, played by Damien Alcazar. The mother doesn't get necessarily as much screen time and as much story, but the father does have a very pivotal role here. Once Jaime comes back from college, he finds out that his father had a heart attack, and that's on top of the news of them on the brink of eviction, so we're dealing with very, very serious stuff. They're going to be without a home, and also his father is undergoing some pretty serious medical issues, and we even see the moment of him having to take some medication. So it's clearly a thing that they have to deal with and they have to contend with. And I love also the subtlety of it, that there were several points throughout the film where I think Damien, he makes some choices to kind of exhibit some senses of like pain and strain on his body. He doesn't like overtly do it, but there's a couple of scenes, like I think it was one point he looks out the window and you can tell like he's starting to like have a physical effect on just like all of these events happening, because you can just imagine a person dealing with stress that's not good for you after you've already suffered a heart attack. So what did you all think about just, them making that a true motivator for, I think, the entire family and for Jaime specifically? Danny, we can start with you, but how did you feel about that relationship and the fact that the father-son sort of dynamic here was really kind of a driving force for Jaime to not only still be a provider, but also to allow him to realize his full potential, towards the end of the film and becoming Blue Beetle?
Yeah, the family dynamic is the heart of this movie, and at least for this movie specifically, there really is no Blue Beetle without the rest of the family. He self-actualized himself because of his family. He did all these stuff because his family helped him, and it really showed this driving force that we haven't seen in other films to that degree. Because like you guys alluded to way back in the beginning of the podcast, like everyone got issues with their family, or you just don't really see it. But it's like Blue Beetle is the family, and with the dad specifically, I think that it just really showed while we really didn't get as much in this film because he had passed away towards the middle of the film, it showed that there was a strong connection between him and Jaime before, unseen footage. Like they just had this strong connection. You could tell, you could feel it anytime they were interacting with each other. As far as the end, whenever they have that talk in this like other realm, I enjoyed the talk. I think it was like, well, it's kind of like the same DNA with other films. I do think it pushed the film along in a way that it kind of needed to, but the background of it, where everything was like floating and destroying and stuff like that, I personally found that weird. I was like, there's no reason for this. I think it would have just really been nice if it was just grounded in the house, because that's kind of what this movie was. It was, to a degree, it was grounded. It was about the family. It was about the house was possibly being evicted and stuff like that. So I think if they just stayed having a conversation in the house, even if they just walked around Palmera City, like, with the other in the neighborhood or something like that, it could have been nice, but they made it like this extraterrestrial thing that it was a little bit too much. But I still enjoyed the talk that they had. I think it was emotional. There was a lot of emotional scenes in this film, and it worked well.
Yeah, we're in a day and age where so many fantasy films, genre films, they experience death or they implement death into their stories, but there's an ancestral plane of some sort everywhere. Even Barbie had one where she just goes into this white void. I think that was like a big component to the end of that movie, and we constantly see this in superhero stories as well. As you noted, it resembles an ancestral plane like we've seen in Black Panther, but it's not exclusive to that either. It's happened in other films where somebody's character is on the brink of death, and all of a sudden they're kind of in the almost afterlife or in purgatory. I don't know where the hell they are. But that scene, I will be honest, like, again, that happened in the third act, and a lot of my problems do fall in the third act. And I don't know if we needed that. I think that the relationship between Jaime and his father was pretty well communicated, and the idea of the health problems was already there, and we knew the importance and the gravity of that. And I know they want to hammer home the point of him self-actualizing and becoming a hero, but to your point, the setting of it just felt a little off and disjointed from the rest of the movie. Des, did that scene work for you? And in addition to that, what did you think about just the integration of his father's health problems and the heart attack, becoming a very prominent part of the story?
Yeah, as for the scene, it definitely took me out of it a little bit. I was like, wait a second. Okay, now where do we go? Like, almost in the same way that I really like, when he first gets hit with the scarab, I'm like, okay, we're here. I like this. We've never seen this. And I was like, wait a second. But now we're in a moment where we've seen this too many times. Oh no, you need to realize you need to be a hero in this moment. Let's magically go to a plane where this person who can help you through what you need to get through exists. Let's just magically go there, and they do that, and it's we just didn't need it. We didn't need it because to me, that moment had already happened when he does suffer that second heart attack, or I don't know how many heart attacks technically he had before Jaime got there, right? But when he does suffer that heart attack, where Victoria Cord is trying to get the scarab. When he does suffer that heart attack, to me, that's one of the saddest points in the movie. But that was also already the motivator. Not only that, but the rest of the family that was alive was also the motivator, right? That moment where they're like, we don't cry now, you know what I mean? Cry, and they go and they just do the mission, and then they get back and they go, now we can cry. That's that's the motivator, not necessarily dad. That's a direct correlation to dad dying. You don't have to do all the other stuff because it's like we got it, and like you said, they're trying to nail the hammer on the head, but it's like we just simply didn't need it. I do like the idea. I know it sounds really dark. Wow. I do like the idea of him dying to health complications, though. That is a very real thing that most underrepresented groups deal with, in our communities. And it's even more so accurate. I know that low key he died because of an entitled white woman
who just pulled up to his house out of nowhere, in fact, and was like, I'm gonna rain fucking hell on everything you got here.
Entitled. She literally was like, this belongs to me, I'm going to take it, and dad died because of it. That is, wow, that's accurate. That was like one of the most accurate things. I was like, yeah, they're going there, low key, they're going there, but it's definitely accurate. So again, I like the idea. I do like, again, it's really dark, but I do like that he does serve as like a little bit of a conduit to the family rallying together around his death. I didn't mind any of that. Again, something we kind of seen before. I was like, but it makes sense in this context, right? It feels good in this context. These are good story beats. I just wish that last random dream sequence did not happen, because I think they could have nailed it and brought it home in a different way, and honestly probably saved some time too. That wasn't a short sequence. I was like, damn, we here for a minute. We're still here. So yeah, I agree with both of you that again, a lot of other stuff worked, but that dream sequence did not.
I think a good way to, instead of having this dream sequence, could have just been like having flashbacks of moments with his family, because his family was like this motivator, like you were saying. And instead of having like this ancestral plane, just like having flashbacks of actual moments that he's had with his family, just the joys of it, the highs, the lows, and everything that goes into that. It's like, then you could have this self-actualization.
Yeah, I do like that a lot better, because, he goes into the dream sequence and he veers around the corner and his father is just sitting in a candlelit room with like 700 candles. I'm like, what? This feels a little too sensual. Like, what are we trying to achieve here? It was a really strange choice and I didn't get it. And then all of a sudden everything, like, it's clear everything is starting to evaporate because he's about to wake up from the dream. So the dream is about to end, but it just creatively just kind of felt out of place from the rest of the movie. And the one key moment that his mother does get in the movie, I think, is actually more effective when she talks to him on the ship right when they're about to leave the island and he has to go back for his sister. She's like, no, now is the time for you to become who you're meant to be. Go kick their asses. Like, go take care of business. Like, that drives home the point, because I feel the spirit of the father, flowing through her. That's something it feels like he would say, and we didn't necessarily need a 3-minute sequence of this dream, in order to achieve that. So definitely one of the things that could have probably been improved upon. Let's talk about his sister, though, in fact, played by Belissa Escobedo. I don't know if I've seen her elsewhere necessarily. She does look familiar as an actress, but she comes in and I think provides a really good balance to the Jaime character. She's obviously a loving sister, but she's also one to just tell it straight and tell it like it is. We find out pretty early that she's not going to follow the conventional path that her brother has. She makes it very clear she has no intentions on going to college. She does not want debt. She's also very much like on his ass about, him getting a job, and then also, meeting Jenny and just kind of knowing and feeling her out. But she still feels like a supportive sister as well. Like she's showing up for him. She's definitely like rooting for him and making sure that he's protected, because anytime she feels that there's a threat towards the family, she's the first up to say something. So I like what they did with her character. I like the presence in the family. I like that, her and Jaime feel like they have a really good and genuine relationship, but it isn't always like 100% just cookie cutter. They're not necessarily like always loving towards each other. It just kind of feels, I think, the most organic and natural probably out of any of the actual familial relationships throughout the movie. Danny, how did you feel about just the way that they communicated the brother-sister dynamic in the movie?
Like you were saying, it was natural, it was organic, but also it was, I think, different from other times, other films that we've seen where there are sibling dynamics, because a lot of times you'll see, one person is doing everything that the family dreams of, or they're just like the prodigal child, and then the other child is like not up to standards or something like that. But these two different people have different career paths, different choices. Like she doesn't want to go to college, he wanted to go to college, all these different things, but there was still support between them. There was no like, oh, I'm the better kid because I went to college. Even the family wasn't like, oh, maybe you need to be like Jaime because he went to college and stuff like that. It was like, it wasn't this hatred towards each other, this jealousy or anything like that. So I enjoyed that aspect most of all between them, because there wasn't this jealousy. Like you can have different career paths and still love each other and support each other, because ultimately that's real life. Real life, we all have different career paths. Like we don't have to follow the cookie cutter way that the world tells us to go to.
Yeah, I really like that they don't create tension between the two in that respect, because that kind of would have felt cliche. Like we've seen that also before, where it's like, oh, the sister feels a type of way because the parents provide more attention and care towards Jaime, but that doesn't feel like the case. And I like that they didn't take that path, because it would have felt, that probably would have felt more contrived as opposed to the route that they did take. But Des, how did you feel about Milagro as the sister to Jaime in this movie?
Yeah, you said we've seen her before. She was in Hocus Pocus 2. I was like, oh yes, I knew I've seen this girl
There we
somewhere.
go. I knew it was something recent. It had to be.
Yeah, it had to be. I was like, she seems so familiar. I think she did what she had to do, man. She really was, I think, the person who is I guess somewhat closest to Jaime's situation, but just being a young adult. You know what I'm saying? That's not Jenny Cord, you know what I mean? Someone who is part of the family that can at least see Jaime uh somewhat act as a bridge, right? She's like you've been away at school, but I also understand why you went away to school. At the same time, I've been with the family and I can tell you what's kind of been going on with the family, kind of type thing. She definitely serves as a bridge, I think, between those two things. So I again, I think she did what she had to do. I really like that they gave her a little bit to do too with the glove, with the Nintendo looking power glove thing. I thought, which was cool, because they could have. I think also in a lot of movies like this that do have a brother sister dynamic, usually one's more protective over the other one, if that makes sense. Usually it's like a big brother protecting the little sister. Oh no, you took the little sister kind of type thing. But they do on a lot of ways, again, but beyond Jaime just going away getting a degree, they feel like on even playing field for the most part in terms of the spot that they fit in the family. And I think I appreciated that as well. Like you said, there's really no bad blood. They kind of are just brother and sister, even though she's like usually mean to him or like always saying some crazy stuff to him. I like how they bring out the love when she thinks he's gonna die and this and that. Those are like the good cliches I like to see. You know what I'm saying? So I enjoyed her role here.
Absolutely. Let's move on and talk about Nana, played by Adriana Barraza, who is an incredible actress, has had a long career in Hollywood. She's one of those familiar actresses that I've seen in a lot of Alejandro Inarritu films. She's been in Babel. She was nominated for an Academy Award in that movie. She's in Amortos Perros. She's had a really, really long career, and she's coming in here as one of the matriarchs of the family. But also, we slowly but surely find out throughout the DNA of this movie that she's like a revolutionary. She's had a wild past. Like, we don't even get the full extent of like what she's been up to, but she does some pretty crazy and ridiculous shit by the end of this movie. Like, she has no hesitation picking up what's the equivalent to a futuristic minigun and just mowing down a lot of these soldiers, in cold blood as it seems. And so a very, very dynamic character. Also had a lot of funny moments, again, feels unassuming in the early stages of the movie, but by the end, she's like a full force to be reckoned with. But also had emotional beats too. So there's a lot to her character. I really like what she brought here. Danny, how did you feel about, the performance here from Adriana Barraza and just like the character and how it evolved throughout the course of the movie?
She killed it. She honestly was one of the standouts of the film. I thought her acting was very, very good. And like you said, like she seemed unassuming in the beginning, but then she was this full force at the end. But also, she kind of held the family together out of everyone in the family that you think about. Like I believe it was Des that said it earlier when she was like, "This is not the time to cry," and then she was like, "Okay, now is the time to cry." She like. I think she was even welcoming of the other court. Jenny. I forgot her name. Jenny. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I just thought that she balanced out well of everyone's feelings in the family, but also like the matriarch. I kind of think of what's that movie? Not Moana, the other one. The one with the Hispanics. I forgot.
Oh, Encanto?
Encanto, yes. Mm-hmm. So I think of that where like the grandma was like this matriarch of the family, but also just with a pure heart. And fun facts is like, oh, she has this crazy backstory, but we also didn't get the backstory, which was good. I like it would have just created more runtime that I don't think that we would have needed if they explained this whole like flashback with her, but they didn't. It was like this fun thing that they put in there, but also that they could use it maybe in a future project. Maybe the family goes out on more missions with Blue Beetle, and Nana just decides to, pick up another minigun and just starts mowing people down. We'll see what happens, what goes from there. But I thought she was one of the standouts.
Certainly. I just love the moment. And she says it in Spanish, so I'm obviously paraphrasing. But when they're on the ship and they're about to go rescue Jaime, and she's like, "Oh, I've infiltrated a prison like this before. Like, I've done that before." And the sister's like, "Wait, what? Like, what are you talking about? What's going on here?" So just a really good sort of like breadcrumb to like her character, because they do sow those seeds like very, very subtly earlier in the movie, like small lines that are just kind of thrown out there until it manifests into like, oh, she's a soldier essentially that's about to, protect her family at all costs. Des, what did you think about just like the progression of her character, the comedy beats that she added, but also I think to Danny's point, which is definitely like a notable thing, is that she did provide a lot of balance amongst the family. You had some people that were very much like on the contrary towards each other and had opposing views, but she would come in and sort of like steady the ship and get people where they needed to be.
Yeah, I love how Nana really serves as, really the honest and true abuela. I mean, I think a lot of our grandmas, are like this. They have secrets and there are things about them that we don't know or may never know. And here she is with a whole nother life in the past. Nana, how do you know how to hold that gun so well? The camera just turns and she looks like the most comfortable person holding the minigun I think I've ever seen. Like I don't know. I don't know how we got here, but it makes a lot of sense, man. And I think she's probably one of my favorite characters. And it's probably literally Jaime, Rudy, and Nana might be like my top 3 characters in the movie. They really all did what they needed to do. And Nana, man, she just brought like she brought some comedy to the film. She also shifted the tone a couple times, but it was campy enough that it worked. Like it was like, oh, this is campy, but I have to allow it. It's too good to not allow it at these moments. You know what I mean? It was like, yeah, no, she's really killing this. But yeah, I think, that's really what grandmas do. They really hold the family together, and they actually for real be having secrets like that, man. So I really like what she brought to the table in this film. She brought a lot of comedy, and she also brought a lot of energy to the movie too, because when you see her, it's not only like, again, a laughing moment. It's like, oh no, it's time to turn up. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like everybody getting excited for what's about to come, because Nata's about to shoot some people. All right, so it was dope. It was dope.
It was really the maniacal laugh for me after she
laugh was crazy.
like 5 soldiers. She is just having the time of her life because she's probably not done anything like this in years. And she just takes down the hairpin and her pigtails fall. And I'm like, oh shit, it's time to turn up. Like she's about to take it to him. So definitely, I think a fresh addition to the family as well. Just something that you don't necessarily expect coming into it. You think she's just like off to the side, stitching and sewing and, taking care of her own business. But it's like, no, she's super important to just the development of like this family and making sure that they can rise up against this opposing force in Cord Industries. And last but certainly not least, we got to talk about George Lopez himself coming in as Uncle Rudy. He is such a fascinating character in this movie, not only in the way that George Lopez plays him, but in the way that they design the character. The character feels very much like almost like a conspiracy theorist to some extent, but also a genius scientist who knows how to like crack code and can deal with all sorts of tech. But he's also very wary of government agencies and systems. And he's paranoid about cameras being everywhere. Like he's that type of person. And he comes in and he's like, don't say that too loud. No. We're not calling the cops. Like we can't do that. Like let's get ahead of ourselves. We can do this. He's secretly building tech on the back end, just like as a hobby, I guess, just to be prepared for whatever comes, So he's definitely the type to prepare for the apocalypse, to just be ready for whatever the fuck comes down. Des, what did you think about just his character in this movie and just like how George Lopez played him? Because you talk about camp earlier with Nana. Oh, yeah. George Lopez went for the camp in the role that he had here for sure.
He did, but it works so well because this is another actor who has been doing this exact, kind of thing for a very long time, this comedic acting. George Lopez, I mean, we all have woken up to the George Lopez song in the middle of the night on Nick at Night. You know what I'm saying? We all have been there, and this man has, I guess, continued to just be part of our lives in the movie and TV sense, man. And so he brought a lot to Rudy, like you said. His character had a lot to it. You're telling me he's like this uncle conspiracy theorist who got tech. He has the tech, he makes the tech, he's cutting out the screens. What? It don't look like it should work, but it definitely works. It's like, I don't know. I also feel like again, this feels like another, at least parts of him feel like another family member that somebody might have. I feel like I got a cousin who know how to bootleg anything. That feels like Uncle Rudy. Like Uncle Rudy might be able to figure it out. You know what I'm saying? He might be able to actually get it done, no matter how crazy he sounds. Some of the stuff he's saying is actually true. You know what I'm saying? Is actually right, man. So man, he brought a lot of heart. It just felt good to see him here again. It was a couple times where it was just funny because when the movie felt like a Nickelodeon movie to me, and it was totally off. I was like, George Lopez is here. It feels like Shark Boy and Lava Girl. Stop it! Why does this movie feel like this? But no, overall, man, again, one of my favorite characters. He was super funny. I also love that he loved this truck so much. Like this truck was like another character added to the movie a little bit. It was just a lot going on with this character. They definitely wrote in George Lopez as his character. You know what I mean? You could feel the weight, the gravitas that he had as a character in this movie, and I was made to enjoy him, man. So yeah, I liked him a lot in this film.
Oh, when Jaime stole the truck and he's at the window and he's screaming, he took Taco, and he I don't know what happens. I don't know if he has like an aneurysm. He just like falls out and collapses. But his eyes are still. I don't know what's going on in that moment, but it was hilarious. I think that works really, really well. Danny, what did you think about the fact that he was also like so pivotal to like all the missions because he is kind of a tech genius. He knows a lot of information. He's very aware of like the role that Cord Industries plays in Palmyra City. So he was pretty present, I think, throughout all the action sequences as well, whether he was just like driving Jaime and Jenny to one location or knowing where like certain tech was or, cracking code or finding out information. How did you feel about him being sort of like an additional right hand to the missions that they were undertaking?
So I have a couple thoughts on this. One is I feel like they just told George Lopez, hey, we have like this certain role for you. Like, so you have to, know these things. And this is kind of like how your character is, but also just run with it and just do you, because I feel like that's how you're going to have George Lopez on this film and not have him be himself. And you kind of saw that he was George Lopez in the flesh, like just doing George Lopez stuff. But when it comes to just playing an integral role, I loved how like he was like this funny guy, but also so intelligent. He knew what he was doing, and and I thought it was super cool. Like this, I found his background more interesting than anybody else's background, even Nana's, just because of like he was like this conspiracy theorist, but also like so intelligent and knew what to do at all times. And I just finished reading the book 1984 about Big Brother and dystopian and all that, and I was like, oh my gosh! And when he said Big Brother, I was like, I'm reading that because I
Yeah.
was still reading the book at the moment. And
Mhm.
it was just so cool. But like, you know, some of that stuff is like scary, true, but it's something that I also like kind of had a gripe about, but it was really minor, was how he was able to figure out all that stuff. Like, yeah, we don't know his past and where he's been, but just like given the state of where they were at, I don't know how long he's been in Palmyra City, like in that house and whatever job he's doing, but like it doesn't seem like he had the resources or the tools to be able to know how to, or even build a machine that like took everything out. So it's like, where, how was he able to do that? And then when he went to the like the layer of Blue Beetle, like he automatically knew what buttons to click. What? How you already know what? But like you didn't even have to like think about it. You're like, is it this one? Is it that? Like even the smartest person, like how you already know what buttons to click. So it's, there was some parts where I was like, they're making him like a little bit too smart given his whatever background we don't know. But I still thought it worked, and it was ultimately, I thought it was a great choice to have him be a integral part of Blue Beetle's just role in this movie.
There's quite a few conveniences that we've already alluded to that certainly happen in this movie to just like progress the story. So I think that's a fair point. I do love too. They don't really harp on it too long, but there's an underlying sense of the brotherly relationship between him and Jaime's father. You know, I think that there's
Mhm.
that moment where after Jaime's father has passed, like they're on the rooftop and they're talking. Actually, it might have been no, it was after that his father passed, but they're on the rooftop talking. And he's just letting them know, like, yeah, you know, your father looked out for me. He gave me a place to sleep, and he was there for me when I needed him. And I'm just like sleeping in the couch, you know, and I'm not necessarily doing anything. So now he feels useful, and he feels like a very important component to the family. So I like that they touched on that too. Before we move on to the chords, though, I do want to kind of go back to what you just brought up, Danny. Like there is that sequence in the layer that happens about midway through the movie, right before I believe that that Victoria sends her forces to go retrieve Jaime and the Scarab. But we find out that Blue Beetle does have a lineage and a history within Palmyra City because Uncle Rudy does already know who Blue Beetle is. He's like, oh, I know exactly who that is. He's like a hero for Palmyra City, like Batman is for Gotham and like Superman is for Metropolis. He's just not as good. And Jenny kind of reinforces that by saying that, you know, her father, Ted Cord, who we'll talk a little bit more about in a second, but her father, Ted Cord, he didn't necessarily know how to crack the code of the Scarab, I guess, because the Scarab has to have a perfect
Mhm.
match. But he tried to build tech on his own to try to support this technology and to create a hero for Palmyra City. So, Des, what did you think about just like that piece of the movie? How they started to like really illuminate the fact that Blue Beetle has been around to some
Mhm.
capacity for a while, and people are aware of his existence.
Yeah, it's very keen to what it should be like in real life, right? Where Blue Scarab slash Blue Beetle is one of the oldest superheroes like ever. It was like 1938 or something. This dude has been around for a very, very, very long time. And I think they do try to use Ted Cord in that same way. I think Ted Cord only came around like 1966 or something like that specifically. But the idea that this character or the superhero had been around a while and now there's kind of a new one on the block is kind of how we should be feeling versus right now a lot of people going into Blue Beetle was like, oh, I never heard of this character before, who is it? So I think I really like, I think that idea that they're trying to kind of hammer home there. Not only that, but I think it's cool to show us, I think, all the technology that Ted Cord was messing with. Like you said, we'll talk about all the Ted Cord stuff in a second, but all the there is a lot of history with again this character throughout comics. Even, you know, this little scarab ship feeling like the owl ship from Watchmen is for a reason. You know what I'm saying? It really is all tied together, and I think in some of those ways. So I think it's like they were subtly giving us like a little bit of history without blatantly be like, look, everybody, this is what already has existed and this is already here. Instead, they decided to kind of take us through like a more like a low-key walkthrough who Ted Kord is, what he's about, because this is a real character that actually exists. And like I said, now there's a new kid on the block who can do all these other kind of crazy things without the use of having to learn the technology and all these other things. So I thought it was pretty cool that they decided to do that, man. I was like, oh shoot, okay, I see them. They that's when I was like, oh, y'all got a little comic booky. That's the stuff I kind of like to see sometimes, kind of those subtle nods at previous characters or things like that. That's like, yeah, I appreciate stuff like that.
It's a good way to expand the mythology as well, to really provide historical context to all this. As we move into Jenny Kord, Danny, what did you think about the integration of that information about Ted Kord, the stuff that he tried to do, and then also how that kind of funneled down to his daughter? Because by the time we meet Jenny in this movie, once again, she's very much at odds with Victoria. It's kind of this conflict, this battle for the company, and we've seen again that before, that was very prevalent in Iron Man 1, where you kind of see the future of a company at stake and what direction they're going to take. Are they going to be weapons manufacturers, or are they going to, sort of provide services and be more helpful to their community? So how did you feel about just the integration of that particular scene in the story, and then also how that ultimately impacted Jenny and her trajectory throughout this movie?
Well, I mean, we already know, well, for those that are watching, so like there is this post-credit scene where there is a future that they could take if they want to take that. I don't know if there's gonna be Blue Beetle too, given everything that's going on, but like I do think that it worked well. We have seen this kind of like formula DNA where you have this like parent that owns this whatever it is that they're like talking about. In this case is toward Kord Industries and the Blue Beetle layer and all that stuff. But it's like, I still liked it because it made me think of just Avatar: The Last Airbender, where it was like Zuko and the Fire Lord and stuff like that. So I kind of liked how she was like, yeah, we have there was this quote, I don't remember the exact way where it went, but it was like, I have stuff, but you have family. And to me, that was one of the hardest like hitting lines that was in the movie that was said by Jenny. And it because it is true, and is this reality that a lot of us kind of like fall into, where we think stuff, like everyone's trying to go after, a new car, a big house, and all this stuff. It's like, but ultimately at the root, what's most important is family and the people around you that you love, whether that's friends, family, whoever it is. So I very much like that. One issue that I did have, maybe it was resolved, but like I didn't catch it, but how Blue Beetle has been around for X amount of years, and even George Lopez knew who Blue Beetle was. But when Jaime was wearing the suit, it's like nobody knew who that was. Like, no, like if you knew who Blue Beetle was, that means you've obviously had to have seen the suit. But like you saw the suit on your son, or I guess it was your nephew, and it's like it was a completely different person that we've never seen before. So I thought that was like, I don't know, I feel like that was a plot hole, unless I didn't catch something. But yeah.
No, I don't think you missed anything, because how do you not connect those dots? Like, it's clearly a Blue Beetle. There's no other thing that it could be except a Blue Beetle. So how is Uncle Rudy, do you not say, oh, Jaime? I think that this is somewhat connected to this Ted Kord thing, and then they eventually meet Jenny before they actually go to this layer. So I think that there were plenty of moments where they could have definitely illuminated that and maybe emphasized that a bit more. To kind of stick to Bruna Marquezine, who plays Jenny Kord. Des, what did you think specifically about the chemistry that she has with Jaime? Because that's also like another piece of the story. It's a burgeoning love story. The first time that they meet, Jaime's sister's like, oh, I think she's into you, because she instantly gives him his number, and she's like, I can get you a job at Kord. I want to make it up to you. And then we see kind of that chemistry develop throughout the movie. And then ultimately by the end of it, there's obviously a romantic relationship that'll start between them. Did that work for you? Do you think it was believable? How did you feel about just their relationship and how it developed over the course of the movie?
I mean, it was cool. I guess, like I think Jenny did something early in the movie that I think the rest of the movie, I was like, I guess she can come. And she literally gave Jaime this scarab and it ruined like the next like 3 days of his life. You know what I'm saying? Like, at what point did she ever think that the family, or giving that to Jaime, he wouldn't be in some kind of trouble? Like, what was the moment where she was like, oh, he'll do anything, take this very dangerous piece of equipment and go anywhere with it, where somebody's probably following you and could potentially kill you? I never really came back from that 100%, that she put this entire family in jeopardy.
I had
by
no
giving
idea that it would do that to you.
Even if you didn't know the scarab was going to do that, there's no way you didn't know all them people was somehow security detail, whatever, was going to pull up on this house, especially some Mexicans' house. They don't, what? They was gonna kick the door down, shoot these people. Come on, man. I just never really came back from that. But again, overall, she was cool, I guess. She was okay. She also had some not her lines were not as lame as Victoria's lines per se, but she also, I don't know, I just feel like there was moments where I wanted her to come through a little bit harder on the lines that she did have and some of the dialogue that she did have, because sometimes she would feel like a little bit of empty character to me. Even though she felt important to the plot, she was there, she was arguing for her case, like, oh, I didn't know, like that, all that's fine and dandy, but I needed something else from her and I just didn't get it. I don't know, I don't really know exactly what it is. Again, I think it could have been the way she was written and the things that they gave her to do in the film, but there was just something slightly missing from her character. But again, overall, she was fine. I didn't hate her, but I didn't like love her how I was expecting to love. I think the love interest of our titular character, right? Like when I look at Pepper Potts, I'm like, dang, I really fucks with Pepper Potts. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, I really like her character. I wanted to feel that way about Jenny, but I just could not, man. And it could have been that bad taste that she left in my mouth for giving Jaime the damn scared.
It was the part for me when Jaime pulls up on her to pick her up and she's like running out of cord and she gets in the car and the guards start shooting and he's like, you could have said that they were going to start shooting at me, and she doesn't mention that at all. So there were a lot of questionable choices. I think that, superhero films and the genre has long had challenges establishing believable, nuanced romantic interests. There are exceptions, obviously. Pepper Potts is one of them, who grew to be one, because the way that
That's true.
The way that they wrote her in Iron Man 1 was not necessarily great. I think she became a great character partly due to Gwyneth Paltrow and just the other performances that came later. But it's one of those things that's always tough, because I think on one hand, you want to really focus on the hero's journey, and any sign of a romantic relationship coming in the middle of that kind of feels like the momentum of the movie gets thwarted, and you kind of lose focus of like, well, this is a superhero movie, I want to see like superhero things, that's a part of it. But then when you do have a character, you also want them to be somebody that you can buy into and support and have a believable relationship with, and it's a lot to juggle, and I think it's a hard balance to strike, and I do think that there were more challenges here. I have to agree that the performance itself by Bruna was fine. She's actually quite an experienced actress, but I don't know what was happening here. Something did feel off, and it was probably just the dialogue and the delivery wasn't the greatest, and then just like the natural chemistry between her and Jaime, it was fine, it was cool, and she had a couple of moments of like high emotion, especially as it relates to like her father going missing and her not really knowing what happened to him. Like, I see that they were trying to provide her with the depth and the nuance that we would want out of a character like that. It just didn't always hit the mark for me, especially because she would just do a lot of really questionable stuff. Like all along the journey, it's like, yo, you got to settle down and like really think about your next steps here, because you're kind of moving in a really funny way that makes you feel untrustworthy, even though we know you're not working on behalf of Victoria. But you could kind of question it, like, is she gonna like betray them at some point, like, and go back on the side of her family? But they did not do that. But speaking of Victoria, let's talk about her, and also let's talk about Omac, the other villain here, Ignacio. We can kind of talk about them together. So on one hand, Susan Sarandon is kind of playing the overarching big bad of the movie. She's more of the mind and really the force at play. But Ignacio, who becomes like Omac, this character in another sort of overpowered suit, he's the heavy. He's like the force of nature. He's the physical threat, I think, to Jaime that they present here. So they kind of work in tandem that way. And this is probably one of the bigger challenges of the film in terms of the execution. I mean, Susan Sarandon, very, very celebrated actress, Academy Award winner, coming in here, and it just, I don't know, just doesn't feel like it adds up in a meaningful way. I don't know what really happened here. Like I said at the top, it kind of feels like she's in a completely different movie entirely. Maybe they told her it was one thing and she went for that, and it turned out to be something else. But Danny, how did you feel about just like the villains in this movie and just like the way that they presented themselves and just kind of the ever present threat that they presented all throughout the course of the movie?
Before I get to that, I want to say with Jenny, while I didn't like a lot of things about her character, something I did like was, while a lot, we do get the same dumb formula where you always have the origin story and the relationship. There's always a relationship that just happens to come at the same exact time that this person gets superpowers and whatever. It's dumb, but on the bright side, there wasn't much like relationshipness throughout the movie until like the very end scene. So I did kind of like that. Although I hate this formula. I did like what was it? Shang-Chi did. Like I totally expected there to be a relationship there between him and the main actress that was with him, but like it never happened, and they were just friends. I'm like, why can't more movies do this, or at least prolong it? If you're not gonna like keep this friendship, you could at least prolong it until the next. It's the origin movie, the first movie. It's always the same time. Like I don't know, it's kind of repetitive. I hate it, but whatever. As far as the villains, I think this is actually the weakest point in the movie. There was just, I've said this multiple times on our podcast, is to me a strong villain is like a strong movie. Like if you got a strong villain, it just like almost always you're gonna have a strong movie, regardless of how everything else turns out. And it was just weak. It was weak. It was oversaturated. It's like you have this. Her acting, I don't even think it was that good. I think it was probably the way she's written, because she is a very celebrated actress, but her acting I don't think was that good. It was just like, we've kind of seen this before. Although I did like how it kind of, I guess per se, brings to light on an issue that does happen in this world. Is you have the rich white person that tries to go do this to minorities and whatever, is just like only self-focused on what this person wants and not thinking about other people. So it's like I did kind of like that, but I do think that the way it was delivered was just really weak. And the OMAC character that she had with her, honestly, I didn't really like it until kind of the end, whenever Jaime unlocked his memories, and it was kind of like this cool backstory that I really would have liked way earlier in the movie, personally.
Yeah, like an hour and a half before, if we learned something about
it.
him.
I would have liked this character a lot better had you given me that flashback an hour and a half before the into the in the beginning of the movie. So I hated where that sequence was, but I did like that flashback sequence, and that was basically the only strong point of the villains.
Yeah, we needed that earlier. I think it felt like a decision that was shoehorned in to give him more pathos as a character. They alluded to it. You see Victoria saying like, I've done so much for you. You were in so much pain, but I think that they could have like shortly thereafter shown that flashback to at least like provide some more motivation to him. One thing I will say about Victoria as a character, it might be bad to say this, but I did like it. It's the one thing I liked about her. Her casual racism, like the fact that she just kept calling that scientist Sanchez like out of nowhere. I thought that was kind of hilarious, but it also reinforces like what you both have been saying, is that this is a super privileged white woman who doesn't give a fuck about anybody else or anything else. She's only concerned with herself and her wealth and her company, and whoever she has to trample over, to achieve that and to maintain it, she'll do so, even her own family at the expense of Jenny. But Des, did you have any other thoughts about, Victoria as a character, or even Ignacio and how he ultimately became somebody that had a little bit more depth to him by the end of it?
Yeah, I think again, Victoria, man, woo. Susan Sarandon is too good of an actress to whatever happened in this. I just don't know what happened because I can't say it's not her acting either. Like I can't. It is part dialogue. Don't get me wrong. It is the way she's written. But like you said, it's like they told her one thing and she was in something else. Even again before all of this is happening, when they're at the what is it, the big country clubhouse thing, and they're cleaning, scraping gum off. Even that whole 10-15 minute sequence was part of the reason this movie felt like a Nickelodeon CW production to me. One, again, the way it was directed in some of these moments, it's like the camera quality went down a little bit. And then Susan Sarandon comes on screen and starts saying like the most generic lines you've ever heard in your life. And I was like, what am I watching right now? And again, it would switch over to something would happen and there'll be like this action sequence. You'd be like, oh, that was decent. Where has this been? It was so weird, man. But she's part of the reason of like the tonal shifts in this movie for me. The way every time she's on screen felt like something different is when she wasn't. It was really crazy. So man, yeah, I really don't know what that disconnect was there, man, but it was very prevalent. It was also funny when you brought up the like I'm not Sanchez thing, because he ended up having like the most Hispanic name of all time, which I thought was it was so funny. I was like, this dude said like 6 perfectly Hispanic names. I was like, yeah, this is way too funny. But yeah, this is I wish they harped on that more, maybe as a character. Like sometimes not necessarily go all the way in, right? Like, oh, she's very clearly the most racist person we've ever seen, but maybe lean into that a little bit. She is a literal corporate top of the food chain white woman who probably has a lot more of those microaggressions, if not macroaggressions, in her. You know what I'm saying? So part of me was like, dang, use that for her character a little bit more. And then we come to Ignacio how do you say his name? Carpax. I don't know. You come to Ignacio, and he was a shell until the end of the movie. Literally a walking shell. He also felt like whatchamacallit, Iron Man 2. Who am I thinking about? My bird.
Yeah. I don't need Whiplash. Was it Whiplash?
Whiplash, yeah. He literally had a whip. But also the technology felt like the character who we were looking at, right? Who literally took technology from him, and then he had a whip. I was like, dang, I feel like we've seen this before in an Iron Man movie. But again, I think some of those scenes were fine. Like the CGI looked pretty good, and so it didn't make any sense. Like I don't know why the CGI looks good 1 second, but we can't. The pool house scene can't look good too.
They filmed that when it was still an HBO Max movie, probably. That was probably pre-theatrical release, like the very first shit they shot. And midway through, they were like, oh, yeah, you know what? We're going to drop this in theaters. Okay, now we can give you more money.
Now we can give you more. That's really what it felt like, though. Literally felt like, oh, TV movie. Fight scene is coming up. Now we're in the movie theater. Like, what? Because one thing we have been saying is we kind of have been reiterating is how bad CGI has been in some of these films. But this movie had some decent stuff that I was like, no, this looks pretty good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was like, no, this looks pretty good. So I wish it was just more consistent in that way. And again, a lot of it had to do with these characters, their villains in particular. Victoria's on the screen, probably doesn't look that great, but Ignacio's on the screen. You're like, shoot, we're in something right now. And I think that's very interesting. But I wish they gave Ignacio more to do early in the film. You can have like the she's the brain, he's the brawn kind of type thing, but the brawn can have a story too. You know what I'm saying? The brawn can absolutely have a story, and it will definitely add to what we're looking for by the end of the film. Because when he decides to blow up, maybe I would care more. Not me. I could have cared less than like. I'm surprised Blue Beetle cared that they blew up. You know what I'm saying? Nobody cried about it. It was just like, oh, I guess that's the end of the film. There goes our villains. You know what I'm saying? We just did not have enough for us to care in those moments, man. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. You know, it was just like, dang, the villains, we lost the villains again. It's just too bad.
Yeah, by the way, Sanchez's name, Dr. Jose Francisco Morales Rivera de la Cruz, and he just blurted that out all at one moment. And what's even more funny, like right after that, he looks at Jaime through the glass and he's like, "Don't worry, I'll be okay." And then his guts splatter on the screen.
It was so dark.
It was really
dark,
really gruesome. So I enjoyed that. I like that he was able to get. I guess it's comeuppance to a certain extent, but yeah, you all said it pretty much. I can't really add on more to that. It was just not by design, just not a great villain injected into this movie. The one thing that I did like specifically about Ignacio when he became OMAC those fight sequences between him and Jaime, pretty good stuff. Like they looked pretty good. I
Exactly.
think that they actually like had some really creative choreography. Visually, they were also distinctive because Omac was significantly bigger. This was like a swole super suit, and it was red, and Jaime was, of course, in the Blue Beetle suit. So a good contrast there, but the motivation behind both of them, it just wasn't enough, you know, and that's really the weak point. It's almost like they just didn't have enough time or real estate within the movie to add more depth because so much of the focus is the family, you know. And I think
Mhm.
we saw somewhat of a similar issue with Miss Marvel because so much of that family feels
Mm.
dynamic, and there's like 5 or 6 people a part of it on top of the titular character. How much can really be left for the villain here? And I think that was a challenge that they probably tried to figure out multiple ways to overcome, but they couldn't quite crack that code. Before we talk about mid credits, post credits here, any, you know, sort of wrapping up thoughts about the final act in particular. As I said, this is also another sort of big critique that I had of the movie, that it was a pretty long final sequence. Like when they go to
Mhm.
rescue Jaime from this island, this prison, you know, I think it's in Cuba. There's a lot of beats here. We already talked about the dream sequence with his father, but there's of course like the rescue in the cave. There's another fight between Omac and Blue Beetle. There's the stuff with Omac revealing his backstory. And then Jaime's family also is able to acquire this large mechanical beetle type of device to infiltrate the prison. So there's a whole sequence with that. There was a lot happening here. Danny, how did you feel about just like seeing all of this go down? Because I'll be the first to admit, when I was watching it, I'm like, wow, we're still doing this. Like we're still going on and on and on, and they're adding more and more, you know, sort of different beats here. But how did you feel about it? Was it successful for you, or did it go on a little bit too long?
So the third act definitely dragged, and you could definitely feel it. You could feel the runtime in there, and you're like, all right, like let's speed it up. This is something we've seen before. It's kind of old. I will say what you guys were talking to earlier, with the action scenes, and we still got those in the third act, was how good they were. And they did say that a lot of the inspiration for their action scenes were taken from Injustice 2, with the way Blue Beetle would actually fight.
Mhm.
And so I love how they took inspiration from previous things with Blue Beetle, especially a video game. Like it's not often that we would see something like that. But with the final act especially, but just throughout the film, I thought it felt a lot like a Spy Kids movie, and it's not
Oh
like a low
yeah.
budget, like this Spy Kids film, and it's not something I
Yes.
really enjoyed. It was like, this feels too much
Yes.
like Spy Kids. It was like with the
Yes.
gadgets, and then I don't know. It was like with the Beetle, with the whole Beetle thing. I was like, okay, this is just getting weird with the Spy Kids thing, and but another thing was, and going in this like technology realm, was Sholo in the Blue Beetle suit, how he could imagine like any weapon he wants and stuff like that. I wanted to see more with that. Like you can literally imagine whatever you want. And I feel like he was picking some basic weapons. Like, okay, the sword thing was kind of cool, but then you got blasters, and then you have another variant of blasters, and then I don't know. It was just like basic things that you could imagine. Like, come on, you can imagine cooler stuff than that. So it's not something I didn't enjoy too much, but my biggest thing was that the third act especially just felt a lot like Spy Kids.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I wonder if that was intentional. The references, you know, maybe some of the visual cues, because I noticed a couple. I didn't pick up on the Spy Kids, but you know, both of you have said Spy Kids, Shark Boy, and Lava Girl. I'm wondering if Angel, you know, wanted to maybe, you know, sort of pay homage to Robert Rodriguez, you know, maybe that style of filmmaking. There was
Mhm.
also like another visual reference earlier in the movie when Cord comes to attack the Reyes family home. When Nana gets like a glass of tea, there's the ripple effect in the glass, very much like Jurassic Park, you know. So I think that there might
Mhm.
have been a couple of things. I wonder if it was intentional or not, but even if it is intentional, it doesn't necessarily equate to it being good, because you know, Spy Kids, you know, to a certain extent, like it gets really campy and over the top and kind of ridiculous, and that
Yes.
might not be that might not be what you want to go for. But you know, I do have to agree with a lot of what you said there. Des, how did you feel about, you know, just sort of like the third act, that final battle sequence, and just, you know, all of the different beats that they hit in that moment?
Yeah, again, some of it, or at least a good amount of it, looked good. You know, for the most part. I do wish we did get a little more inventiveness on the side of just again showing us, you know, how what Jaime I think can really do. Part of me feels like, again, movies do this a lot where it always feels like they're holding on to something and so they can use it for later. Like, oh, Jaime can do this thing in the second movie instead of just being like, no, just like do something crazy now and figure it out later. And I think I was looking for something else a little crazy. Because to Danny's point, there is like a, dang, y'all using blasters again. Like we can't. I don't know. Let's do something a little bit different, than what these blasters have going on, which is why I did kind of like the sword. The sword was like, okay, we're doing something else here because we don't have a lot of superheroes right now who out here with these big ass swords, kind of slicing through people. So I was looking for, I think, something else that was similar to that in that last act, and I didn't necessarily get that. We did get more of those. We have to clean up a lot of the story up. Let's turn Jaime into a superhero. Let's give Omek a backstory. Let's do all these things to where it's like we can't be as inventive with some of the things that I feel like they wanted to be inventive with, or they could have been inventive with in those moments because so much attention had to be given to some of those other things. So again, the last fight sequence in particular was fine, but a lot of story beats, like you said, was happening, man. I mean, the sister in the other court got lost. Jenny got lost from each other. That was a whole thing. And then, I mean, again, you still have Jaime tied to the thing before he even goes into dream sequence. He's still tied up, and there's a lot going on there. And they got to plug up Omek. And woo, we were going through a ton. And then we still got Nana has to go off with her minigun. Like you said, Jaime still has to do his thing in the hallway and save the sister. And then where's Jenny? We don't know where Jenny is. Let's go back to the ship. Now we got to go back and get Jenny. It was just, oh my God, we were going through so much. And yeah, I just wish they dialed some of that back. This really is a film that I think could have benefited just from being shorter, to be honest. So like, again, some of those early story beats, maybe use some of those early story beats in that first 20 minutes and use that for something else and cut back some of this other stuff. There was just some things that feel like it could be trimmed. And I wish they would have done that trimming. And a lot of it does come from that third act, man. It was just a ton going on. But that's what I've been saying. It's been feeling like Spy Kids, Shark Boy and Lava Girl. It was giving that a lot. They landed on this island with a beetle. Killed all of these people. I do have a point. Part of this movie is literally Jaime telling I'm gonna call her Khadijah just because that's like the blackest thing I can think of. I'm gonna call her Khadijah. It's telling Khadijah that not to kill, and the family is killing everybody. Nana killed got like 10 bodies by herself. Rudy's over here getting bodies. They killing people with the scarab, and when they landed with the tonal. I don't know what that tone is. Like Jaime can't kill nobody, but the family can. Is that what we want to tell the kids? That your family can kill people, but to be a superhero, you can't kill anyone. I don't know. That was very confusing to me. But yes, man, that third act, man, they just need to clean it up. And yeah, that's really it.
Yeah, it almost felt like, I don't know this for a fact, but in the, again, we can't ignore the fact that this was once a streaming only movie that became a theatrical movie. And so the budget, of course, inflated and grew to being a $100 million plus movie. It almost felt like that they just like added on layers to this final battle to make it feel big and make it feel theatrical when it didn't necessarily need to have any of that. Because I imagine that the script probably in the initial phases didn't have any of that stuff just for budget considerations. But then they were like, oh, well, we have more resources, a little bit more time. Like, let's blow it out and do it bigger, where that doesn't always equate to better, because I think the Beetle stuff on the island, I actually really liked that. I thought that was like going really well, but you needed to really tighten all of that stuff up because it just went on and on and on and on. And I was like, wow, we have like so much going on here. And it's in stark contrast compared to the first two acts, which I thought were paced considerably well. Like I really like the pacing of the first two acts. It's really it kind of becomes very unwieldy in the last 30 or so minutes of the movie, where it just blows up and become like this big over the top spectacle with all these different moving pieces. And I think that the story was much more grounded, or at least could have been much more grounded than that, and actually emotionally worked out better for us. But let's talk about these post-credit scenes. I mean, the second post-credit scene, it's really just kind of like a fun gag. El Chapulín is like this parody superhero series that they sort of called back to at the end. That was something that was injected in the middle of the movie when they first go to Cord Industries. But the real one, I suppose, for the future of this character perhaps is the mid-credit scene, which basically sheds light on the fact that Ted Cord is still alive. We hear a voice recording that alludes to the fact that he's not dead. Everybody presumed that he was dead. Of course, his own daughter Jenny thought he's been dead this entire time, but he is in fact alive. We don't know where the voice is coming from. We don't know who's voicing the voice. In fact, we just know that there's a voice saying Ted Kord is indeed alive. Danny, I'll start with you. Do you think that this actually goes anywhere? Do you think that they'll bring this into the future of the character, not necessarily knowing how Blue Beetle is going to factor into James Gunn's plans? I guess the character is going to continue, but I don't know if that necessarily means that by extension, all of these other story threads might pick up later on. But what do you foresee in terms of what they might do with Ted Kord in the future?
Oof. I mean, anytime we're talking about future DC, it is muddy waters. It's like who knows what's gonna happen. We still don't even understand the whole reference of this is the first DC character, but not the first DC movie. That makes no sense to me, but whatever. To me, as far as Ted Kord, granted, I think a lot of these movies, they get, I guess, sequels based off the success of the first one. But Blue Beetle was in this weird thing where it's like, I feel like we're going in this whole new direction with James Gunn, where it's like, does the success of Blue Beetle even matter? Does it bombing? Does James Gunn still keep Blue Beetle? Like, who knows? There's so much layers to this muddy water thing, but I like how they did put it in there, because you don't know what's gonna happen, and you might as well put it in there because they could do something with it. And a lot of these movies, I know they did this a lot back with Marvel back in the day. They would just throw little things in there, not even a post-credit scene, but things throughout the movie where they're like, hey, I'm not directing like the next Avengers movie or the next sequel. I might not even direct the next sequel with this. Who knows? But it's like, I'm putting it in there just in case. They can do what, if they don't want to do with it, they don't have to, but it's there just to be there. So it's like, I like that people do that because it leaves an open door. And for DC to have Ted Kord, who was like maybe the OG Blue Beetle, maybe not, but it's like, there could be this big backstory with that, that could play a big factor in a second Blue Beetle, or I guess this reimagined first Blue Beetle, of whatever it is. But it's like they could do something with it, and it did kind of make me think of Ant-Man with like the mom.
I was literally just thinking that Janet Van Dyne. Yeah.
It's like being in this realm who we thought she was dead, but now she's not dead. I was like, this kind of gives me Ant-Man vibes. So I don't know how I felt about that, but yeah,
literally a like one for one similar beat where it's like, oh, Janet's been alive this entire time, now we have to go find her. That becomes the premise of like the next movie. Des, how did you feel about this? Did this post-credit scene do anything for you? Does it get you excited about a Ted Kord possibly being a part of any future plans with the character? What's your outlook on that?
I don't know about Ted Kord specifically, but maybe there's just so many other Easter eggs in there that feel like that's something that James Gunn could play with if he really wanted to. James Gunn has talked about Booster Gold. We know Booster Gold and Blue Beetle go way back. You know what I'm saying? There could be something there. The smallest Easter egg was in Ted Kord's little lab. There's some damn Oreos in there, which Martian Manhunter loves Oreos. I don't know what that's about, but who knows? Yeah, I don't know. They could be on an adventure together somewhere. So again, not Ted Kord specifically. I really, to be honest, don't care about Ted Kord. Like I'm for sure a Jaime Reyes guy. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the Blue Beetle I know and I am accustomed to. So again, who knows? I don't. Mate, the thing that what I will say, James Gunn is so goddamn good at making you care about characters you know you don't really feel like caring about, and then a movie happens or a TV show happens, you're like, dang, I like this person. So I'm not gonna throw it out the window until there's some more explanation to whatever the hell this movie is, and what it's supposed to be and where these characters are going. But I will say there's some potential there just because of the way, again, James Gunn operates. I think it's all about communication and how a lot of this comes out in the end. But for right now, I just don't care that much. So we'll have to see.
This is by no fault of their own, but to be honest, Marvel and the MCU with Phase 4 has just gotten me so sick of character introductions and post-credit scenes and what that might mean for the future, because we have gotten introduced to so many characters in those projects and we have no idea when they're going to come back. Literally no clue. What Clea, when are you coming back? Hercules, don't know. Arrows from Eternals, Harry Styles, is he ever going to be in a movie again in the MCU? Probably not. He's a really busy guy, so this is kind of a similar vein. I mean, even over in the Shazam movies, like Mr. Mime was teased in the first movie and then teased again in the second movie, and it's like,
Yep.
we'll probably never see that character. So I don't know. It might never equate to anything, honestly, but having an open door is a good way to, possibly set up something that can come in the future, because you can always lean back and rely on that. But I think it really just depends on how it manifests in the future. But that pretty much brings us to the end of the movie. I will ask you both rankings. I know that this is like, again, we keep saying this, like DCU, DCEU. I mean, whatever this we don't know what any of this means, but I do want to ask you where this would rank in the DC films that we've gotten for the DCEU. Let's just stick there, because we don't have the proper James Gunn DCU yet. But compared to other movies like Wonder Woman, Shazam, Black Adam, where would this rank for you? And also, any final thoughts, any summation points that you want to make about Blue Beetle? Des, let's start with you. How did you feel about the movie as a whole, wrapping up, and where would you rank it against the other films that they put out?
Yeah, I think this movie has a decent amount going for it. It's so interesting because it's like the most bittersweet movie I've watched in a while. It's like, oh, that's a good idea. Oh, that's not such a good idea, over and over. It's like the entire movie for me, and it's very interesting. What it does, one of my favorite things about this movie, again, is Solo Marduena, man, who is just, I think, really good in this role and really good in this movie. If anything, in my mind, I'm like, James Gunn, Loki just might keep him just because he's good. You know what I'm saying? Like, and now what happens is, once you're introduced to a character and it's the first iteration of that character that you've seen and they're good, it's like, well, now I can't see anybody else, especially if they're coming soon in the game. So now I feel like they have to keep him. But he is absolutely and for sure one of the things coming out of this film. Not only that, but again, one of the first Latin characters to get the title of a superhero film, man, is huge, and it should be a bigger deal than what it is. But unfortunately, the guys of DC and everything they have going on right now has made this film fall by the wayside. Not only that, the similar DNA to other films, again, it unfortunately, a lot of that is all too familiar. They do some different things in this film to try to levy that a little bit with the family dynamic, with, again, how Latin the movie feels. This movie is very, very Mexican feeling. You can feel it in the way their housing looks, their religion, the way they talk to each other. There's a decent amount of Spanish in this movie. There's a lot of those things that I really like about this film. We talked about the CGI, which a lot of these films we've been watching lately, we talking shit on the CGI. But I was like, dang, a lot of CGI in this movie looks good. On the flip side, a lot of the stuff that's not CGI or that are out of the guise of some superhero film don't look that good to me. And it's really weird. And the villains aren't that good in this film. And it's awkwardly paced. And some of the tone isn't all the way there in this movie. Again, it's a very bittersweet movie for me. And I think bittersweet to me is even a good way to explain about where it fits in all of this as well. It's like, oh, it was time for a movie like Blue Beetle. And on the other end, it was definitely not time for a movie like Blue Beetle because of everything Warner Brothers has going on to make this all so crazy. So bittersweet, again, is the best way I can explain this film. So many good things going for it, but so many good things going against it as well. Where it fits for me, amongst the DCEU films, it's really weird because I feel like the most recent releases we've gotten kind of all on like the same playing field for me, where like I like a lot about them and there's other things I don't like about them. So like Flash, Shazam, Fury of the Gods, and Blue Beetle all like exist on like the similar plane where they all have like something going forward and something not going forward all at the same time. But right now, just for right now, because everything changes upon rewatch, I have it at my 10th spot. And that being said, the Flash is 8 right now. Shazam, Fear of the Gods is 9, and Blue Beetle is at my 10th spot. And that right now, that's kind of where it fits, and that's how I feel. So we'll see what happens.
Danny, final thoughts on the movie, and where would you rank it in the DCEU?
I got a couple thoughts on this film. Ultimately, if we take aside, which I guess is hard to do, but it's like if we take aside of the similar DNAs and stuff, obviously it's still gonna have its issues, but like that's always like a common theme whenever we were watching, watching this film. It's like, oh, well, they copied that from this and they copied that from that. It's like, if we just look at it as its own movie and not thinking about other films, I do think it does very well. Yeah, it has its issues, but like, I still think it's a very solid film. And my favorite thing about it is that it's, quite honestly, unapologetically Hispanic. And it's like, they have, like Des has said, a lot of Spanish speaking in the film, and then you just have the subtitles. I love that. And they have all these little jokes and references, and the animated character, the superhero character from their race. It's like so many different things that it's unapologetically Hispanic, and especially Mexicans, that it's kind of beautiful to see of the diversity. We got this with Black Panther. We've seen this with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. It's like all these different things that it's like you love to see that there are other cultures out there. There are other elements to this world that's like so grand, but a lot of times you get the same, white person and no family and blah 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 blah. But it's like you got something different in that, and I thought I very much enjoyed that. To another point, I thought Sholo did very good in this role. I thought he was a very good actor. However, I will say I think he has a very, what's the word? I don't think his range is all that large. I think he does well in a certain range. We see that with Cobra Kai. We've seen that here. Like, he has a limited range, so I wouldn't put him in like these other roles. Like, a lot of times we see a titular character in a superhero universe, and now we want to put him in everywhere. We've gotten that with Tom Holland. We've gotten that with all the big trio in Avengers, and basically any other Avenger. But it's like you want to just put them everywhere because now they're like this face and so popular. But I really wouldn't do that with Sholo, because I think his range is specific to certain genres, certain films, certain shows. So that's just something I wanted to know. Overall, I do think it does better than certain DC films. The second Wonder Woman, to me, probably the worst DC film of all. The Flash, honestly, I know there's a lot of mixed reviews about it. Some people loved it, some people felt okay, some people hated it. I am like on the okay to hated it side. I very much didn't enjoy it. The CGI bothered me. There was just so many things that bothered me about the movie that some other people liked, but I hated it. So I have this higher than Flash. As far as I had this higher than the first Shazam. Personally, I like the second Shazam more than the first one, but I have this higher than the first Shazam. The second Shazam, I don't know. I think I had this higher than that just because of me being a Latin person. I laugh more at the jokes than other people would, because some people just wouldn't understand it as much as we would, because it's like, oh, that's literally my grandma and that's my mom. Like, she would totally say that. So something like that. It's like, so to me, I have more connection with this film than I would with other films. Black Adam, personally, I think that one struggled a lot. So I have this kind of like middle of the pack. Obviously, there's like the big movies, the first Wonder Woman, Batman vs Superman, Man of Steel. Like, there's those big films. But as far as the ones that are not like the big trio, the holy trinity of DC, I do think it's quite up there. Although the villain, very, very much, I am a huge passionate person for good villains. I harp on it on our podcast all the time. So the villain sucked, but it is what it is.
Absolutely. So Blue Beetle, I think, is the perfect example of a movie that is perfectly suitable and perfectly fine. However, it came just too late. If this movie had come out 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I think it would have been a lot more successful than what we're seeing right now. And it's really unfortunate, because I do think that to a certain degree, DC and Warner Brothers kind of have abandoned this movie. It doesn't feel like that they put everything behind it that they could have, that maybe some of their other films have gotten, and a lot of that is due to the strike. You can't do certain things. Obviously, they are restricted by a large proximity compared to their marketing rollouts. But I think that it's a shame that we're seeing so many of these films in the superhero genre as of late focus on these diverse characters and other ethnic backgrounds, whatever the case may be. when we should have been getting this stuff, maybe a decade ago. It's kind of unfortunate that we are just now getting that. But that being said, I do still appreciate and enjoy the fact that we are getting it, and the fact that so much of the Latino culture and heritage is imbued all throughout the DNA of this movie. All of the references, all of the jokes, all of the inside stuff that you really have to be a part of that culture, or at least have a close proximity to it to really understand it. I think that stuff only strengthens the movie because it helps it keep it grounded and authentic, and you can create real, tangible, and meaningful connections with your audience that way. And I do hope that more people discover it. I hope and maybe anticipate that this is going to be a movie that can grow over its lifetime. Just because the theatrical run might not be the most successful, it might not set the world on fire. That doesn't mean that it still can't be successful. Maybe it's a slow burn, maybe on HBO Max. Eventually when it lands there, it can find a new audience. I'm very optimistic about that because it is a good enough film, I think, to really bring people in and draw them in. The performances, by and large, I mostly enjoy, with the exception of the villains, as we already noted. Some of those storylines just don't really add up. But when you focus on the family of this movie, when that comes down to being the core element of why we're here for this experience, I think that stuff mostly succeeds. And I really, really enjoyed what everybody brought to the table. I loved how different all of the family members are compared to each other, and how they ultimately impacted Jaime's journey into him becoming the hero for Palmera City, and just what they represented and meant for him. And so ultimately, it's a pretty fine movie. Yes, it is a bit derivative of other things that we've seen. Yes, it comes in an era where many of the superhero films and TV shows that we're getting often feel mediocre or just not up to par. And so it's not necessarily doing anything new. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it's still serviceable and I think satisfiable enough to where it's something I would watch again. It's something that I would revisit down the line and would want to say like, oh yeah, I can tap back into Blue Beetle. And hopefully the character in and of itself can have a future in James Gunn's DC universe, whatever that looks like. We don't know if that's going to be a sequel or maybe a team up film or some sort of spinoff. We'll have to wait and see, but I think that there is more that you can revisit with the Blue Beetle character, and so I'm hopeful that he'll come back in some capacity. As far as my ranking, it's similar to what you both have said. It's kind of middle of the pack. So, there have been, I don't know 15, 16 movies at this point. It's right in the middle there. So it's in my, I think, 10th spot as well. So it's right after Shazam! Fury of the Gods. I enjoyed that movie just a little bit more, but Blue Beetle it's still fine, and I think it's definitely not their worst by any stretch of the imagination. They have certainly put out films that we just typically don't tend to speak about, and so it's right now in the middle of the pack for me. But again, we'll see what the future holds for the character of Blue Beetle and Jaime Reyes in the DC universe. But folks, with all of that out the way, those are all of our thoughts on DC's brand new feature film, Blue Beetle. If you've checked out this movie, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think. And before we wrap up here, I just want to send another special thank you to our special guest today, Danny. We appreciate you so much for joining us today to talk about DC's Blue Beetle. Everything you said, just a major contributor to the podcast space and to the game. Of course, wanted to repay that favor for you having us on from a couple of months ago for Spider-Verse. And hopefully we can do this again soon, and we can link back up and talk about more stuff. But before we wrap up here, can you just sort of remind the people where they can find Unqualified Heroes?
Yeah, absolutely. You guys can find us, me and my co-host who's not here, at Unqualified Heroes. Once again, we're on X, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you want to go. We typically release weekly to bi-weekly episodes just about movies, pop culture, whatever's kind of going on in the world in that genre. And I do want to extend my thank you again for just having us on. I very much appreciate it. Just talking to other nerds like me, because I get tired of talking to my co-hosts. Now that's a joke, but just seeing other people that's like out there that have like-minded opinions, and even just like different stuff that I've never even thought about. Some of the things you guys said today, and even on the Spider-Verse podcast, and just other podcasts that you guys have that I'd be listening to. It's like just opinions. I'm like, oh, I never really thought about that about this movie or about this topic. So I very much enjoy that, and I just very appreciative for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. We'll do this again for sure sometime soon and link back up and talk about more nerd stuff, of course. But folks, with all of that said, that's all we have for this episode of Two Black Nerds. Again, thank you to Danny and Unqualified Heroes. Go check out all of their stuff, and also go check out our other podcasts as well. We just recently released an interview with Carl Jones last week. Go check that out, and all of our other podcasts that we've dropped recently, all the latest movie reviews. And so we will be back soon enough to talk about the latest and greatest in pop culture and entertainment. But until then, we will see y'all next time.
God, you never ask.
Hell yeah. They've been trying to stop the